Okay. So, so today I'm going to talk to you guys about paraphilias and fetishes. So again, I talked to you about human mating patterns, and now I'm going to get down and talk a little bit about the actual sexual stuff itself. But what I'm not going to do is talk to you about sort of quote normal unquote sexual stuff. And I put that in quotes because actually fetishism is one of the things you can think about it, depending on your definition, can actually be quite normal. But I'm not going to talk to you about the stuff you're going to get in a class on human sexuality. I assume some of you guys have had a class on human sexuality. And so I'll just mention a couple things from that briefly, but I'm not going to get into that stuff. I really want to get off the, out of the box, so to speak, off the grid into the uncharted stuff, the weird stuff. And now some of this weird stuff you also may have had in a human sexuality class, especially if you had a good class. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about evolution, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Freud today in context with these things, because Freud was one of the people who first wrote about psychological theories about fetishes and things like this. So I think it's an interesting lecture. I'm going to definitely give a trigger warning here. So if you're triggered by sexual content, if you're triggered by bondage, discipline, sadomasochism, you're triggered by transsexuals, you're triggered by anything, we might show some stuff is going to be triggering to everybody. So you can decide how you want to deal with that. I'm going to show you we'll talk a little bit about bestiality today. So, trigger warning. Trigger warning out there. Okay? So just so you know. Okay. All right. So I want to start by talking very briefly about this case study. And this is a case study of Lisa Nowak. You guys might have remembered her from back in 2007, about 10 years ago, 11 years ago now. She was an astronaut and had gone up in space and done all these great things. I don't know, did she go up in space? I think she went up in space. I can't remember. But she had developed sort of an obsession with another man, and she had she had a husband and kids, but she developed an obsession with this other guy, an astronaut, and she'd been an astronaut and Navy captain. And to realize what a great accomplishment that is a huge career accomplishment, especially for a woman to reach this rank and to be able to be an astronaut. It's a really big deal. I mean, it's not something your average person is going to do in their life. So this is, she's really gone quite high up. However, she develops an obsession with another man, and she takes a 1,900-mile drive there and back from Houston to Orlando to confront another Air Force captain female who she thought was having an affair or going out with this other guy that she liked. And so she drives all the way. She wears astronaut diapers so she doesn't have to stop to pee. She gets there, and the idea is that she's probably going to attack this other woman out of jealousy, and they find her. And then, somehow she gets caught, and she's found to have pepper spray in her car, and a knife, and a steel mallet, and a BB gun, and they think, okay, she's definitely going to attack this other person, so they arrest her and put her in jail. And this is obviously, there's the astronaut picture, there's the mugshot picture, so you can see this happen here. So again, just goes to show you that these kind of things can happen to anybody, so not to freak anybody out or anything, but these kind of things can happen even to people who are very, very accomplished people. Now, we don't know anything really about her psychology, what's going on in her psychology. If there were psychological interviews, and I imagine there probably were, those have not been released. She is a mother of 3, recently separated from her husband of 19 years, and so this is how she ends up. So what happens in her case? There's a trial, and she intends to pursue an insanity defense. Lawyer stated she suffered from major depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, insomnia, brief psychotic disorder with marked stressors at the time of the incident, which is pretty amazing considering her accomplishments in life. Okay? As you might expect, trial judge ruled to suppress her Miranda statements to the police as well as evidence found in her vehicle. There was police misconduct in the search. They didn't do the search properly. And basically what happens is that she is, basically kind of given a slap on the wrist. She's found guilty, but she is basically gets a year probation in addition to time she'd already served in jail. By the way, this is her afterwards, so she seems like she's got herself back together. I haven't heard from her since. If you know anything about that, let me know. I'll be curious. This is just an example of how sexual desire, sexual feelings can really lead somebody who's really highly accomplished astray. Okay? And you guys are all seeing this now in the media with all this Me Too stuff. Again, I'm not apologizing for these guys doing Me Too stuff, but the idea of these guys, how shall we say it in clinical terms, the little brain is getting them into trouble, right? Usually it's guys who get into trouble, right? But this is a rare case of a female getting in trouble. And so we'll talk a little bit about this stuff. I'll talk to you a little bit today about stalking behavior, and we can talk a little bit about that. You guys all know about that because we live near LA, and you know. The joke is for movie stars to know you've made it is you have to have a stalker or two, right? That's the joke. But it's actually not really a joke. It's something to take very seriously. Okay. So, let's talk about sexually related behaviors. First of all, what we're not going to talk about. This is stuff you get in human sexuality class. We're not going to talk about anal sex. About 40% of people tried it. We're not going to really talk much about homosexuality, which now we don't consider to be something abnormal. Back in the day, in psychology, homosexuality was considered to be abnormal. Now we don't have those sort of archaic beliefs anymore. About 6.5% of men and about 11% of women have had a same-sex experience at some point. So that's quite a bit of people. We're not going to talk about group sex, orgies, swinging. We talked a little bit about that before already when I talked to you about human mating patterns. About 7.3% of teen girls report being involved in some sort of group sex activity, and about 1 to 6% of couples supposedly have an open marriage, a swinging relationship. Just some statistics there. Okay. We're not going to talk about masturbation. You know the joke about masturbation, right? If I ask you, basically, how many people here have ever masturbated, and then the people who don't raise their hands are just lying, right? That's the joke. Of course, that's not necessarily true. We do have some people who are asexual, and I was going to prepare a little bit about people who identify as asexual, but I didn't have time to put that in the lecture, so maybe that comes in next year. Okay. We're not going to talk much about oral sex, also very, very common. I did talk to you about, the Karista village people, and probably one of the things that led to the downfall of the Karista commune was the fact that they had banned oral sex on women, and the women did not like that. So oral sex also very common. So these are all things you get in human sexuality class. You should take a class on that. That's a class they will not let me teach. That may become more apparent why a little bit later, because the stuff I'm going to show you. But anyway, not because I'm going to be weird about any of this stuff. Let's just be clear about that. It's not because of behavioral reasons. Okay. We're only going to briefly talk about sexual dysfunctions. We'll talk briefly about gender identity disorder. We're going to talk a little more about body dysmorphic disorder, and that kind of also relates to gender identity disorder when we have people who become transsexual. I'll talk to you more about that a little bit later on. So we'll get into that. So I wanted to mention and talk to you now just to kind of, again, sort of shake you out of your complacency. How we define our gender is something that is very interesting. And of course, there's lots of different ways to define gender. If you take clinical psychology from me, the clinical abnormal class, I will give you a whole lecture on intersex individuals and the different types of intersexed individuals, which is really interesting. It's something that's, you hear a lot in the media now, but there's not a deep understanding of what's really going on there and the different versions of this. So I do that in the clinical class, the 313 class, which I'm not teaching this year. But I'll talk a little bit about that, just briefly later on. Okay? All right. But I want to talk to you a little bit about your complacency. So this is a man whose name is Buck Angel, and he's very buff and tattooed and very muscular. And Buck Angel is biologically a female. And he is famous because he works as a porn actor. That's his job. Now, the thing about Buck Angel that's interesting is that Buck Angel is a man. He looks very manly here, but actually Buck Angel is a woman and did not fully undergo sex change surgery. So Buck Angel, wait a minute, where's the other slide? There it is. So this is Buck Angel's body, and you can see Buck Angel retains the genitalia of a female while identifying and acting as male. And so a very interesting, well-spoken person. If you listen to the interviews, if we had some time, we could listen to some interviews or watch some interviews with him. Oh, we could do that, actually. Very interesting guy. So let's see if we go up here. Let me go back here. Buck Angel interview. Okay, let's see here. This is from a Dutch show.
I've been to the YouTube channel, on Facebook.
Oh, sorry, this is a different video.
From what I can gather, and the website, I should mention that, the website, and I've seen the free tour of there's a lot of porn, so I had a shower and then I checked out some more, and it seems to come back to your moneymaker, the mangina. Why the fascination with this part of you?
I think because people have never seen anything like that before.
Right.
And so I think that for me also, it was a sort of self-esteem booster in a sense, because I was never going to be able to get rid of my vagina. It just wasn't going to happen. So I sort of worked with it. I worked with what I was given. And so I think what happened was I really didn't realize how fascinated the world was going to become with it. I thought it was just going to be like this cool thing I was doing on the side, and people were like, of course I did it for money, but it exploded into something I would have never in a million years thought it was going to explode into.
But you've lived as a woman, so you know how women are treated, and you know male privilege.
Exactly.
Does it make you more of a feminist? Do women embrace you, or no? You're not sucked into you're not the man now. You're not.
No, I'm a feminist for sure, but I'm across the board. What I would love to do is teach men.
People. Interesting.
I want to. More importantly for me is I teach men about women.
Right.
Okay, and that women get me. Women totally understand me. Women, I'd say I have more women fans in the mainstream world, or I have more gay male fans in the porn world. They're my fan base, gay men.
Okay.
But women, because I'm a man. I mean, men.
Okay, so you get the idea there. So hopefully right now, you are experiencing confusion. I don't know if the guys, according to Buck Angel, the guys are more confused than the women. The women get him. I don't know. You tell me. But this is the idea here that, gender is, there's a fluidity to gender that we don't often think about. So again, today, I'm going to ask you to think a little bit about that. Okay. All right. That's Buck Angel. He's not the only man like this. This is another guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. By the way, Buck Angel makes his living doing porn, and so he is a man with female parts, and of course if you're going to make a good porn movie, you've got to get a female with man parts, a trans female, and then they make porno movies together, and then every other possible combination that you could imagine. And so again, this has a certain fan following, a certain fan base, and apparently he's been rather successful at it. Go figure. Okay, let's talk briefly about sexual dysfunctions. Again, you're going to get all these in another class, so I'm just going to mention these. You should also learn about these in clinical abnormal psychology besides the human sexuality class that you're all going to take or have taken. Okay? So these are typical ones: hypoactive sexual disorder, absence or desire for sexual activity, which causes the person distress or problems. Could be due to, not usually due to a medical condition or substance abuse, things like this. And you're hearing a lot about this now because these incel guys, you hear about these incel guys. You know, these are guys who are involuntarily celibate, and they go online and they talk about how, like, you know, women should be forced to have sex with them, et cetera, et cetera. It's crazy stuff. Could be something going on there. No. Sexual aversion disorder. Person has considerable anxiety, fear, disgust feelings regarding genital contact, either in sex in general or some specific aspects of it. Okay. And they found for this one that people, both these things, hypoactive sexual disorder and sexual aversion, occur more often in people who grew up in homes where sex is considered to be something bad, considered to be something sinful. Okay. Female sexual arousal disorder, inability to become excited, especially evidenced by adequate physical responses, but not the mental response. And 19% of women have at some point supposedly suffer from this disorder. Not necessarily permanently, but have had times where they've suffered from this disorder. It's quite a bit. Okay? Male erectile dysfunction, this is the one you've heard about a lot because of every Super Bowl ad, you know, for whatever kind of, let's put this in clinical terms, old man boner pills, basically. This is what this is about. So about 10% of men usually have this. There can be different versions of this. There's a version of this, of course, that has to do with blood flow, circulation, and a guy gets older, you know, he's not as good shape, the blood doesn't move around as well. This can cause a problem with this. There's another also cause that can be psychological, can have almost a purely psychological cause. You find this, and sometimes the guy's perfectly healthy, maybe a young man's perfectly healthy, but he can't basically get it up, and there may be a psychological disorder. And that is something you see a lot in Hollywood films. So that's a Hollywood trope, you know, the young guy can't get it up for whatever reason, and then, you know, there's something going on in the film, and there's some psychological thing going on, and he resolves it, and then he's able to have this wonderful love life after that. Okay. Again, very common. This is the one you hear about all the time, because the pharmaceutical companies would rather make boner pills for old men than, you know, go out and do something like, you know, cure cancer or something like this, because there's a lot of money in this. So again, if you want to know what drives the pharmaceutical industry, it is money, and this is why they spend so much time and resources, you know, developing Viagra and, you know, the other type of drugs, because there's a huge market for it. Okay. All right, female orgasmic disorder, again, another one, a long delay or absence of orgasm after normal sexual excitement. About 24% of women, about a quarter of women, will experience this at some point in their lives. Okay. Again, not necessarily permanent. Premature ejaculation, this is where a man ejaculates after only minimal amount of sexual stimulation. About 30% of males will experience this at some point, usually when they are young and sexually inexperienced. Okay. There's also something not typically permanent. Dyspareunia, genital pain associated with intercourse. Men and women suffer this, but it's more common among women. About 14% of women at some point may have this. And related to this is vaginismus, which is painful contractions that prevent the enjoyment of sex. Okay. Now, there's many other medical conditions, drugs, legal and illegal, all sorts of other things that can affect sexual behavior. Of course, lots of psychological things can affect sexual behavior, and of course, you know, psychoanalysis is really, since everything is about sex, you know, of course, they talk a lot about this, and so, again, this is just sort of the tip of the iceberg, but I just wanted to mention these things. You're going to get these in more detail in other classes, hopefully, okay, before you leave here. Okay. Now, this is your trivia question for the day. What is this woman, I assume this is a woman because she's got nail polish, but I shouldn't, how dare I assume anything. What is this person with nail polish on their hand holding here?
Sea slug.
Sea slug. It's not, doesn't it look like a phallus of some kind? No guesses? Somebody got it last year right away. I'll give you a hint. The person who got it was from the Pacific Northwest. What do they have up there? No guesses?
Elephant trunk?
Oh, good guess, but no, way off. Good guess. Okay, well, I'll show you what this is. This is a gooey duck clam. And so just so you realize that both male and female genital shapes appear often in nature, right? You know, you talk about flowers looking very much like a vagina, you know, I mean, you can go through nature. These are forms that appear throughout nature. Phallic things look phallic, things look, you know, like a vulva, all over the place. So again, you know, these are forms that come out everywhere in nature. And as human beings, of course, we're attuned to looking for these things. You know, so you'll see these kind of things sort of everywhere. Okay. By the way, these are very good eating, and you can eat these raw. You can cut them up and eat them raw. If you want to see a show, there was an Anthony Bourdain episode of No Reservations where they go up and they catch these and they chop them up, and you know. So if you want to, like, you know, cross your legs and go if you're a guy, then you can watch these things get chopped up. We're going to talk about castration in, I think, next week or the week after. So hopefully not today too much. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about evolutionary psychology and male and female sexual differences. Okay? So I'm really going to talk about biology here. Okay? I'm not implying that males are better than females or females are better than males. Okay? So let's be clear. I'm going to make non-value judgments here. This is just clearly about biology. And a lot of the evidence for some of the stuff I'm going to say comes from this very interesting book called A Billion Wicked Thoughts by this guy, these two people, Ogus and Gadam. And what they did is they did an interesting thing. They wanted to know a little bit about human sexual habits. So what they did is they went to Google and said, hey, can we have all the results of your search engines so we can check and see what people are searching for? Because we know people are searching on the internet about sex. And Google said, sure, you're not identifying anybody personally, just aggregating the data. So sure. And they did a study and they wrote a book about this, what the internet tells us about sexual relationships. And they looked at all these searches, and with a sort of in the back of their minds, a sort of evolutionary theory about human beings, you know, knowing about sort of the evolutionary nature of human beings. And what they found is something that people have been theorizing about, but they sort of were able to no, I don't want to say prove is too strong a word, but justify some of these evolutionary ideas. Okay? So, first of all, male and female humans are wired very differently with regard to their sexuality. Men are visually cued, while women are visually cued, but to a much less degree. Okay? And this is very, very interesting when you see internet searches of women. Women are searching for things, sexual things that involve relationships, that involve emotional interactions, things like this. When men do searches for things on the internet, they are just searching for things that are very visual cues. Okay? Now let's talk a little about female sexuality. Female sexuality functions with regard to both short and long-term liaisons. This is because females have much more risk and investment in the results of sex. Because if a woman has sex, then she might get pregnant. The guy can have sex all day long, and for the most part, if you don't read the National Enquirer, men do not get pregnant. Supposedly there are some cases where men have gotten pregnant. There was a case recently where it was a transsexual man, you know, like Buck Angel, who got pregnant was able to be inseminated, even though he was, you know, physically a man, looked like Buck Angel, taking testosterone and everything, was able to be inseminated and carry a baby to term. But that's not quite what I'm talking about. There was a case in the National Enquirer where a man basically carried a baby to term, and the baby, the placenta or something, attached onto the intestine. Nobody knows if that's true or not. It was in the National Enquirer, so we put a big question mark around that. So for the most part, guys can go around and have sex all day long and not have children, not give birth to children. Women have to be concerned about the fact that they might get pregnant from a sexual interaction. And so the results of this is that women are much more choosy than men about their sexual partners. Okay? Women are much more, on average, women are much more choosy about their sexual partners. Women have to choose because they are considering, you know, at least unconsciously, And again, back before modern times, because now we have birth control, but birth control is something, reliable birth control is something that is really a modern invention. Didn't really exist, really since about maybe 100 years ago, a little more than 100 years ago. I mean, there were condoms, much earlier on. They weren't very good. They weren't very reliable. They certainly were not very hygienic. They were a lot of times reused back in the day. But it wasn't really until the modern era, and really until World War I, where condom use became really widespread. And I think I talked to you guys about that before. Did I mention that before? Yeah, I mentioned that before. Okay. So birth control is something that's really new for human beings out of all of our history. So for much of human history, having sex always carried some sort of risk of pregnancy for the woman. And the idea here is that not only for human women, but our ancestors, our primate ancestors as well. And so what happens is that this causes the psychology of women to evolve. That women who are more successful at having children, raising children, and passing on their genes are the ones who pick their mates a little bit better. And so what's happened is that modern women now tend to be more choosy about their mates than men. Okay? Now, so men are wired in, they're visually cued. So for a man to become sexually aroused, he just sees something that is, basically, I'll get to this in a minute, reminds him of something female or a female, and that's enough for him, just visual cues. Women have a little bit more, and women have evolved to have something that is like a detective agency, a vetting agency, okay, in their minds with regard to men. Women also do something else, which is something that's not typically done by men, but women also will help each other vet potential mates. So, you guys, a group of women, you're at a bar, you're hanging out, having a drink together, consciously or unconsciously, you may be in the market for a mating partner. And let's say you're at the bar, some guy comes up, starts talking to you, kind of hits on you, buys you a drink, you talk to him for a few minutes, you think he's cute, you think he's kind of nice. He talks about how he takes care of his aged mother, and he loves puppies and children, and yet he's also big and strong, he's got a biker tattoo, so he can fight off the saber-toothed tigers, right? And so he's just that blend, right? I talked to you guys already about the bad boy thing, didn't I, in this class? I talk about it so much I can't remember if I talked about it to you guys. I will talk about that at some point. This guy looks like you're pretty, you think he's attractive. You think this might be a guy that you would go home with, right? What do you do? What do most women do in this case? You're there with your friends. Yeah.
Go back and talk to your friends.
Yes, exactly. You go back and talk to your friends. And what do you do? What do you say to your friends?
What do you think of this guy?
What do you think of this guy? Exactly. And then what do your friends do? Typically.
Tell you the truth?
They'll tell you right away if he's a no-go, right? Mm-hmm. And you may listen to that or not listen to that depending on your psychology. But a lot of times your friends will then go up and talk to this guy. They'll go up and say, hey, how are you doing? They'll chat with him, we'll brief him, and then they'll come back. And they'll tell you, yeah, I think he's great, if you don't go for him, I'll go for him, whatever, right? Right? So there's a vetting agency that goes on. This also goes on in the mind of the female. That for females to become sexually aroused, they vet these guys. There's an extra step that guys don't have. And this happens in your mind, and then also you then go to your fellow females and use their vetting agencies to really check these guys out, right? Right? Now, one of the reasons we know women do this from an evolutionary standpoint is that women are better at what than men? What's the thing that women are better than men at, especially in these kind of scenarios? Talking. Women are better communicators. They have better language abilities, and they're much better at conveying emotional messages in their language. Okay, the more subtle emotional things, women are much better at this than men. And the theory is this is why, because women need this vetting. Women who were successfully able to vet were the ones who were able to communicate better, communicate with their friends, and vet these guys better and pick better mates who are going to have better long-term fitness. In other words, they were going to reproduce more than women who didn't do these things. So that's the idea. Okay. Now, none of these mechanisms are perfect, right? And of course, psychology gets in the way of the vetting mechanism, big time because a lot of women choose these bad guys, right? The bad boy syndrome, which, am I going to talk about that later or not? I didn't talk to you guys about that already?
I don't think in this class.
Not in that's another class. I talk about this a lot. But the idea here is, well, let's talk about it now. So any of you ladies ever been to a bar and you're sitting in the middle of the bar, and consciously or unconsciously you may be searching for a mate. You're sitting in the bar, and at this end of the bar is a guy from Cal Poly or Cal State Fullerton. He is an engineering major. He is neat. He's clean. He's going to have a good career. He's going to make good money when he gets out. He's nice. He's not, doesn't appear violent. He's hygienic. He's got a lot of good qualities that make him very good father material for your children, right? And he's down there. And what evolution would have you say is, well, you're going to go pick that guy because that's the guy, Obviously, he's got all the good qualities. At the other end of the bar over here is a guy, and he's drinking some Jack Daniels, and he's got wearing a biker thing with a patch on the back, and he's calling the waitress a bitch, and he's doing these kind of stuff, and he's like, he rode up on his Harley, and he's like, and he's kind of muscular, and he's a little mean looking, and people aren't messing with him. The other guys are scared of him, and you're sitting here at the bar, and this guy is the logical choice, and which one do you become attracted to? The bad boy. None of you women have never been attracted to the bad boys, right? No. You might know somebody who has, right? This is very, very common. When I did therapy, psychotherapy, I was in practice, this was a very common thing, a problem that would walk in the door. A woman would be, had gone with the bad boy. And guess what? He's not the best choice for mate. They get abused, they get knocked around, they get maltreated, because this guy is very immature. He's got a lot of his own issues, right? But he's very attractive to these women. Why evolutionarily would he be attractive?
Is he seen more as a protector?
Yes, very good, because this is the guy who can fight off the saber-toothed tiger, right? Because your brain is still programmed as if you were living on the savannah in Africa and having to protect your wife and child, your mate and your child from predators that might come up, wolves and lions and tigers and bears, oh no, right? And so this guy has that immediate attraction thing, and he's full of testosterone, so he can do that. And the idea is that, that he's also full of testosterone. He can drink Jack Daniels and ride his motorcycle and survive. So you think, well, genetically he's really fit because his body can tolerate all that stuff, and he's still, kind of buff. And so he's willing to put himself into danger. And so there's a certain attractiveness to that too, because that also has some survival value. The problem in our society is that women are operating on these sort of prehistoric brains in a modern society where, you're not really fighting off saber-toothed tigers, right? And this guy is a much better choice, so your engineering major is a much better choice, right? But the primitive brain still finds this guy attractive, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Right? Yes?
So is that why sometimes women keep going back to the bad boys?
Yes. That and others, there's psychological reasons behind that too. Right, having to do with how they were raised and brought up and expectations about men, this kind of thing. What they found is they've done some interesting studies, and they found that in urban areas, like in cities, that women tend to find men who are more, what's the word they use now? Metrosexual. Do you know what I'm talking about? Metrosexual. Men who are more groomed and nice looking, and they care about fashion and these kind of things. Women find those kind of guys more attractive. When they go out to more rural areas, women find guys who are like the big, beefy lumberjack, bad boy, types. They find them more attractive. So that's a very interesting, there's been a study on that. I had a paper somewhere about that. So again, it kind of supports this idea, right? And so what I've always thought of doing is if I wanted to make $1 million, what I would do is I would start doing seminars for guys, like weekend seminars, and take this guy. He's kind of a lost cause. He needs to come in for therapy, which he probably never will, right? But this guy over here, he's workable material. I can take him and I can give him some little bit veneer of badassery, with a little work on this guy. I can teach him how to shoot a gun, ride a motorcycle, and do some karate or something with him for a few weekends, and I can get a little bit of badassery built into him so that now the women can be sitting there, that guy's really badass, but this guy's badass and he's like clean, and he's going to have a good job, and this guy becomes more attractive, right? I'm going to do that. It's on my list of things to do. I'm going to run weekend seminars. That's all we're going to do. We're going to ride dirt bikes and shoot guns and have fun. But this guy's never done these things, right? Because he's grown up, in a society where he's been coddled, and his parents have protected him from everything like all the parents do now. This guy needs to be taken out and done something, learn to do something cool. He's going to watch samurai movies. He's going to do cool stuff. He's going to learn to be a little bit of a badass, right? This is what this guy needs, right? This guy is going around complaining. Women don't like him. I'm a nice guy. You guys ever hear this complaint? Women don't like the nice guys. Very common. You go on the internet, search for that, you'll get a billion hits on that, right? So this guy, this is why. This guy is a little too nice, right? He's got to have a little veneer of badassery. This guy needs to learn. He needs to get his act together. He's got some immature issues going on here. He needs some therapy. And if he gets some therapy, if he comes to therapy, he can mellow out. He can sort of explore, some of the things this guy's doing, like getting an education and not doing drugs all the time and all those kind of things. He's a little bit more of a hard case to crack, in my opinion. Okay? Now, the ideal guy is somebody who's right in between, right? And I would dare say those of you guys who've successfully been able to have a relationship with a woman, enter into some sort of relationship with a woman, my guess is you probably have some elements of both. Okay? Now, you may not be perfect, and your girlfriend may not be perfect, so you guys could have a screwed up relationship. I hope not. But if you're decent people, you're decently well put together psychologically, and you hook up, probably there's some elements of both, and then cultural stuff comes into play. And then the cultural stuff comes into play. So you live in New York City, and a guy who's kind of wears a nice cologne, and he's wearing Bruno Magli shoes, and nice, really well dressed, and he's got a good profession. That guy becomes attractive. Or you live out in Alaska, and the guy can chainsaw a tree in half, and in 15 minutes, that guy is more attractive. There's cultural things come in. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so I went off on my tangent about that. All right. So, but again, this also reiterates the idea that it's not the guy doing the choosing so much. The guys might think they're doing the choosing, but usually it's the women who are doing the choosing. Usually the women chooses you. You might think that you're I chose her, I just went over there and picked up on this. You make these guys, they can just go pick up on any girl they see. I knew a guy like this. I had a friend like this in college. And, I was just astounded that he could do this. One time he said, give me right over to this girl's house. I said, okay. So I drove him over there, and I said, well, I'm going to go. He goes, oh, no, just wait 10 minutes. He goes, because I'm either going to come back with you or I'm going to stay. I go, what do you mean? He goes, I'm going to see if she'll let me stay over. And I'm like, when did you meet this girl? Oh, I met her this afternoon at the mall. How long did you talk to her? 10 minutes. And you're going to come over to her house now? And first of all, she gave you her number and told you to come over to her house. That's amazing. And now you're going to go in, you're going to tell me. So he goes in, literally 5 minutes later he comes out, you can go now. This guy was amazing. And he would do this like he had some, but he was not doing the choosing. The girls were doing the choosing. He was a very good looking guy. Let's just put it that way. Very good looking guy. And he had elements of badassery, and he was also very nice. So he had really good combination of both those things. Right. You guys, that's why they do the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, right? Which one? Where you think he's adorable? Arnold, right? You don't think, when you watch him in Conan, you don't think he's that adorable. You might think, he's kind of muscular and, hot. But it's when you saw Kindergarten Cop, where you really thought he was hot. Oh, Arnold, right? And big muscular guy. But he loves little children. He's so nice to little children. And that just, he loves puppies and little children. And that just, now you're just melting for him, right? That's the idea. Why is that? There's a reason for that, right? Because this guy over here, when you have kids with him, he may beat your kids. He may have so much testosterone to fight off the saber-tooth tiger that some of that aggression may bleed over into the family life. And he may beat you and he may beat the kids. Okay, but if he can be this big badass guy, fighting for the tiger, but he loves little children and puppies, that's a good combination. Right, that's a good combination. Okay. And I worked with enough domestic violence cases to see these guys. You can tell these guys right away. I got called in for jury duty in a domestic violence case. And they said, can you be fair and impartial in the jury? And I said, yeah, I absolutely can be fair and impartial. But I said, this guy's going to open his mouth and talk for 2 seconds, and I'll know whether or not he beat her up or not. It'll be very easy to tell. But I'd probably just look at him and be able to tell, because you get a sense for these sort of things. And they said, you're off the jury. No, I didn't get the good. Okay? So women are doing the choosing. The man needs to be dominant and aggressive, but not so much so that it would be violent toward the women of your child, right? Therefore, he has to have a soft side, clean, reliable, those kind of things too. So you want the guy who's a little bit in the middle. Okay? Now, this is about long-term liaisons. Short-term liaisons are all about getting strong genes and occur more often when a woman is fertile. Okay? So this is why women typically will have one-night stands with the arrogant, dominant jerks, and it's done in secret. This is the guy you slept with and you never told anybody about. Okay? Okay? So the idea is, you know, you want this guy over here to raise your children because he's clean, reliable, and won't beat you up and kill you and the children. But this guy's got some very strong genes. You know, he's really muscular and built, and so you really want the genes for your children from this guy. So you sleep with this guy in private, and then you take up with this guy, and then you start basically, oh, I'm pregnant, it's your child, and then you raise. This guy ends up raising the child of that guy. Okay, and this is a very interesting thing. Again, this is not meant to be value judgment against women because men also cheat quite a bit, right? Men are more just sort of wired for cheating, right? It's very common. But this is a typical pattern where women might cheat. Okay? And it's been estimated that anywhere from 1 in 30 to 1 in 4 children are not related to the presumed father. Okay? This is very interesting. Very interesting. And there's a really wide variety. There's a really big range here, right? 1 in 30 to 1 in 4 children not related to the father. Or the other pattern that happens is that the woman is very young, she takes up with the jerky biker guy, has a kid by him, wises up, dumps him, and then marries a nice guy who becomes the child's stepfather. It's also another very common pattern. Okay? Now, not picking on women, right? What's the pattern guys have for cheating, right? Chris Rock said it, the comedian Chris Rock said it, a man's only as faithful as his opportunities, right? So a guy, especially has money, he will go out and, he will at least have the inclination there. Not every guy does this, lots of guys are faithful, but, the inclination is there because men are wired to have, men are wired to become attractive to women who are different than the one they've been with previously. Okay? And that's just a typical thing. And this is a typical thing you see when you do relationship counseling. Oh, he doesn't find me attractive anymore. No, it's not that he doesn't find you any attractive. It's just that he's wired to now look for a woman that he doesn't know and find her more attractive to sort of he can spread his DNA around. That's the male strategy. Okay? It doesn't excuse men going out and cheating on their partners, but this is the brain is wired for these things. Just like the female brain might be wired a certain way, male brain is wired a certain way. Okay? And so these are the kind of sort of compromise things we have to deal with as human beings. Now, there are other things that we have in our evolution. You remember I told you these evolutionary patterns, there's lots of contradictory patterns. Lots of contradictory patterns, right? So a guy over here may be a jerky guy and, I mean, he's going to be really violent. But he also might, also feel very protective toward children. Because, human beings were also wired to be very protective of other people's children. It makes group cohesiveness better. It allows us to do things as a group. There's sort of a return on investment by everybody in the group protecting each other's kids, and we're also wired for that. So that's just an example of something that would be, it would confuse these patterns. I'm giving you the simplest form of these patterns, but we have a lot of other things in our evolutionary past, a lot of other sort of programming that also could be contradictory to some of these things I'm telling you about. Okay, so I'm giving you a very simplified version of it. Okay. Now, if you want the more complicated version of it, I'll give a plug for Matt Campbell's class, Professor Campbell. There's a class on animal behavior. I highly recommend that. And you'll go and you'll learn more about some of the more detailed other stuff that's sort of contradictory. I'm just giving you sort of the basic stuff here. Does that make sense? Okay. Hopefully I haven't offended anybody, I hope. And I'm not trying to be offensive here at all. And I definitely, I self-identify as a feminist male. So I'm not saying again women are better or worse than men, or men are better than worse than women. This is biologically, evolutionarily, some of the things that people are theorizing about that seems to make sense when you look at male and female behavior. Okay. All right. So the bottom line is female sexuality is more complicated than male sexuality. Sorry, guys. Guys are basically more simple. Male arousal wired directly to the visual centers of the brain, visual centers of the brain to the arousal centers. Female physical arousal must detour through this detective agency vetting process first. This is why a woman can display signs of physical arousal but not be attracted to the guy or turned on by him. Okay? The body might be reacting a certain way, but the mind is like, no. Okay? She needs the right psychological cues before physical arousal will be connected to the emotional centers of the brain. This is why, by the way, there's no female equivalent of Viagra yet. This is the holy grail of the drug companies because they've made just a boatload of money with the male Viagra, which is very easily, you just get the parts working together and, you know, the guy will be aroused and, you know, no problem. For females, it's not so easy. You could increase the blood flow to, how shall I say it clinically, the tingly, naughty parts, but, you know, it doesn't do the same, it doesn't have the same effect. And so this is a holy grail for the drug companies. How do we find a drug that will also help females become aroused? And they think they're making some progress on this. Last I read about this, they're making some progress on this. And so they may end up having a drug for females. Now, if a female, if the problem is just a physical problem, like a female has a blood flow problem or something, yes, then something like Viagra might be a little bit helpful. But just in general, they've not been able to come up with that yet. But I think they're making some progress on this. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But this is one of the holy grails of one of the drug companies, because, you know, rather than, you know, curing cancer or, coming up with an AIDS vaccine or something, they can spend their money doing this. And you can say, well, that's just because they're going to make more money, but you can also look at it in a Freudian way and say, this is how powerful Eros is. That we care about Eros. We put the concerns of Eros above even concerns of life and death. You know, you look at the behavior of the pharmaceutical industry, you know, as an example of this. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's an interesting thing to think about. Okay, this finally gets us to what we're supposed to talk about today: fetishes and paraphilias. Okay, fetishes and paraphilias. Now, paraphilia is the wider word, the more umbrella word. Paraphilia is from the Latin paraphilia, meaning liking, loving things. Fetish is a specific instance of a paraphilia. Okay? Paraphilia is wider categorization. And fetishes pertain to objects. Paraphilias are anything that becomes associated with pleasure. Fetishes, certain situations, visual stimulation, tactile sensations, etc. Okay? So paraphilia is the wider term. I had to make this clear. I testified about paraphilias and fetishes in front of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, and I had to make this the first thing I had to tell them, because they get the two mixed up. Well, most people mix these things up. Fetishes are an instant of a paraphilia. Okay? And I'm showing you a picture here. This is a paraphilia / fetish, what we call it, paraphilia, called the crush. They usually call it crush fetish, crush paraphilia. And what this is that the women, pretty women with nice feet, are basically teasing with and then stomping on some sort of thing. Sometimes it can just be a grape. Sometimes it is a living creature, a bug. Sometimes even a bigger living creature like a mouse. Sometimes it can be even larger animals. And they end up squishing with the object there. And the paraphilia is that men watch this and masturbate to this, and this gets them off. So this is the so-called crush fetish, and I testified in the Senate on this, trying to get the distribution of these videos banned, because it's very hard to get rid of the actual behavior, but and to keep people from making the videos, because they make them in sketchy places like, you know, Russia or China, somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. They make these videos and they're able to sell them, but the distribution of them is now banned because they were able to pass a law on this. Okay? And my thing was to say this was a sexual thing. So they called me in to be the expert to testify this is actually a sexual thing. So I can talk to you a little more about this. But it's a really kind of disgusting fetish because animals are hurt doing these. And the people doing the videos, probably a lot of them are pretty psychopathic. A lot of the women just do it, act in these things just because they're getting paid. But the people making these videos, there's probably a little psychopathy involved. And every once in a while I get a call from a DA district attorney from somewhere, and they'll say, we've got a case of somebody doing this stuff, and, can you tell us something about this? And I'll give them a whole rap about this kind of thing. Okay, so how do we know, let's go a little bit over the history of how we know about fetishes, what we know about fetishes, and really some of the earliest psychological theorizing about paraphilias and fetishes come from Freud. And in 1919, Freud wrote a paper, a very famous paper, called A Child is Being Beaten. And this was based on 6 cases, 4 women and 2 men, one of whom was hysterical and one of whom was obsessive. And from these 6 people, Freud draws lots of interesting conclusions. The first is, and again, you guys don't need to know that, you don't need to study this and know this in incredible detail, but I'll just go over it with you. The first is that a child is not actually being beaten here, but the children fantasizes about this. This starts very early on in life and lasts until about the 5th or 6th year. The fantasy is reinforced by the child not themselves being beaten, but by the child watching other children being beaten. Usually siblings at home or kids in school back in the day. They hit kids in school, kids got beat in school. The later fantasies usually have beating where the child does not have any serious injury. And so you guys may have experienced, anybody here have brothers and sisters? So do you ever remember that time when your brother or sister got into some trouble? And you knew they were going to get in trouble and you knew they were going to get a spanking? Anybody remember that? Think of an instance where you got to remember your sibling was going to get in trouble and you knew they were going to get it. You knew their parents were really pissed, they're probably going to get a spanking or something, right? How did you feel?
Scared.
Great.
Did you feel gleefully blissful, like maybe a little scared? Because maybe you had something you might go over to you, but you kind of felt, oh, they're going to get it, right? I can't wait till they get the spanking, right? I can't wait till they're going to get in trouble, right? Anybody had that experience? That's what Freud's talking about here. Though this is at a very young age, a little kid, right? Now, if it's like the beating is undeserved or there's some other issues going on with it, then you might just be afraid, right? So we're talking here basically about normal development. But if you're really afraid, afraid for your life because you were going to be next, because your parents were indiscriminately beating the children, that might be a different thing, okay? Hopefully that was not the case for you. Okay, so this is really how Freud looks at how pleasure and suffering become linked, right? This is the first instance when the child is gleefully feeling, excited and happy that their sibling is going to get beaten by the parent, going to get spanked. This is the first instance of sadism. This is where sadism comes from. Okay? Sadism, where you get pleasure from somebody else's suffering. Sadism comes first. And it's related to a lot of the, even Freud said this, to the constitution, to the biology of the individual. Okay? It's not necessarily a traumatic event, but it can be defended against, and these defense against this stuff can last in adulthood. It can lead to some kind of perversion. This is a fantasy also related to the Oedipal complex. Because later on, what's the fantasy is going to be, the sadistic fantasy becomes that you're going to, kill or castrate, if you're a boy, kill or castrate your father and then marry the mother. If you're the girl, you're going to get rid of the mother and marry the father. And so again, that sadism can, if that does not get resolved, then that can lead to problems later. This is Freud 101, right? The Oedipal complex. First stage. Childhood fantasy of being beaten, often associated with sexual arousal, but this is not genital for little kids. Sexual arousal for Freud, for children, you have to remember, is anything that gives them pleasure. Okay, depending on what stage they're at, there can be pleasure zones in the body, but this is something that's just pleasurable to them. So don't think of this as, when he says the sexual life of children, he's not talking about genital sex here. Okay, this is some kind of arousal, pleasure. Pleasure from jealousy and rivalry, fantasy or witness of actual beating of another child, elaborated into the father beating another child hated by the child. So the next thing that you do is there's some kid you don't like, there's some kid at school bullying you, and you fantasize about your parent or some authority figure beating that or spanking that child. I don't know if anybody you can remember experiencing this, but this might be something, if you did experience it, it's gone unconscious. Okay? Then the next phase, the child, male or female, fantasize about having exclusive love of the father, i.e. Oedipal complex. The genital wish is transformed through repression to a beating wish, i.e. masochism. So what happens in the next stage, according to Freud, is that the child wants the love of that opposite sex parents, and so they then, because previously they've associated those good feelings with the beating going on, the spanking. Now they're thinking, if that parent spanks me, I will get the love from that parent. And so they start having masochistic fantasies of that opposite sex parent spanking them. Okay? Third phase. Child replaces the father, who's doing the beating, by conscious fantasy of another authority figure, father figure, and the beaten child, usually some anonymous male, usually some other. And the child takes the position of the beaten child, sadistic fantasy with masochistic pleasure. This vision of the vision of this provides sexual excitement, is often accompanied by masturbation, may persist into adulthood. Okay? So this is the fantasy of being beaten. The child takes on the role of both the beater and the one being doing the beating and the one being beaten. So it becomes sadomasochistic. Okay? Sadomasochistic. Now, do I have any proof of this? Well, I would say the movie 50 Shades of Grey is the proof of this. Okay? A lot of people like that movie. A lot of people went to see that movie. More people than will admit might say that females may be a little bit more into this kind of stuff. That's what the movie implies. I don't know. Do I have this in here? Let's not talk about that yet. So, the bottom line is a lot of people like their sex a little rough. They like a little BDSM in their sex, male and female. Okay? Like a little beating, they like a little doing the beating, they like a little beating. Some people develop a preference for one or the other. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. But this is according to Freud, this would make sense. Okay? Sadism comes first. Okay. And again, it also, for Freud, he said this too, it's also related to the person's biology. They got a lot of testosterone or whatever, male or female, they're a little more into being a little more sadistic, right? They have less, maybe they're a little bit into being a little more passive. Okay? Individual feels passively sadistic and feels guilt over this. This leads to feeling that this gets repressed, causes the person to regress to the sadistic anal stage where sadism is transformed into masochism. Due to the guilt over the sadistic feeling and incestuous feeling toward the opposite sex parent, the person turns the sadistic feeling toward themselves and they become masochistic and also a little narcissistic. In girls, the pattern's a bit different. There's conscious sadism, which doesn't exist for the boys, repressed to masochism, which manifests as conscious sadism. So Freud's idea is that women are more consciously sadistic. And again, this is the cartoon here. Sexual perversion, usually males. By sexual perversion, he means fetishes, usually males. Sexual gratifications from masturbation while having masochistic fantasies. These men transform themselves into part of a woman, or they take on the feminine attitude. The person doing the beating becomes a woman. Oedipal complex is resolved by the boy taking on a feminine role. This then is the mother who beats them. And this last one is directly related to this, right? So the man is fantasizing both being the woman doing the squishing and being the thing being squished. And one may be more than the other, right? And so this is why men watch these videos and masturbate to them. It's why they're exciting to them. Fits kind of Freud's ideas. Okay, now, hopefully you're all thinking now, because you're smart psychology students, you're all thinking, there's a lot of pretzel logic going on here. Right? Freud's kind of pretzel logic. You know what I mean by pretzel logic? Very convoluted theory. Okay? It makes sense if you know a lot of psychoanalysis and you really buy some of the basic psychoanalysis things that happen in your mind, they happen all the time, but it's very pretzel-y, very, very pretzel-y. And while I like Freud, and I like aspects of this theory, and it makes sense to me, I think this is a little too pretzel logic for me. I think we can simplify this. I think we can apply evolutionary biology to this, and we can simplify this down quite a bit. So that's what I want to do next. So let's look at the evolutionary psychology perspective of fetishes and paraphilias. And you know, we've already started to talk about some of this stuff, so I'll go over that again. Okay? So let's just go from the basics. Animals respond to objects in their environment. Okay? These responses are either attractive or avoidant. Okay? You see something, you like it or you don't like it. You see another person, you like it or you don't like it. I see a cup of coffee, I immediately like it. I'm attracted to this, right? I see a cup of, stale day-old tea, and I'm like, ugh, I don't want anything to do with it, right? So this is something typical thing that we do, our brains do. We go around all day long, we're attracted, and we avoid things. Some things are attractive, some things we want to avoid. Okay? Now, when we see attractive objects, especially if they're related to survival, coffee, related to survival, we tend to experience these as pleasurable. Okay? We see things that we don't like, the avoidant things we want to avoid, and we tend to associate them with negative consequences and think they don't have survival, like drinking some poison or drinking tea, or what's the typical thing we think of as disgusting, right? I just got a dog, so what have I been doing all week? Picking up poop, right? It's disgusting, right? You got a plastic bag, you pick it up, tie it up. It's disgusting. I'd rather avoid doing that, right? Most dog owners look around, nobody's around, dog poops, all right, we're just going to go, right? You don't bother to pick it up, right? Because they want to avoid that. And it's got some, and again, if you think about things that really have a survival value, right? I mean, like, okay, there's something disgusting, rotten meat over there. Well, I know that I'm really disgusted, I want to avoid it, because if I eat it, I'm going to get sick, right? And I might die. So I learned to avoid things. So we learn to do this. It's a basic thing. Animals do this. All animals do this. Even a bug will do this, right? Certain things it finds pleasurable, certain things it avoids. It has survival value. Okay? So things that have survival value confer pleasure. Okay? Things that have negative survival value, things that get you killed quicker, are things that we find disgusting, things that we avoid. But when we avoid those things, we also feel pleasure. Does that make sense? So when I avoid picking up the poop, I feel better than when I actually have to go pick it up and feel disgusted, right? So I avoid it, I feel good. That also gives me pleasure, which is why so many people don't pick up after their dogs, by the way. Okay? So, get pleasure either way. Get pleasure by going towards something that has, that gives survival value, and we have pleasure by avoiding things that don't have survival value, that have negative survival value. These responses to objects, for a lot of things, are innate. Some are learned. Obviously, for human beings, a lot are learned. But even the learned ones have some, probably, connection to the innate things. Humans can conceptualize objects, remember past experiences with objects. Okay? So I remember that time when I had to pick up the dog poop and I didn't have the bag. Like, yuck, so even though I have a bag now, it's still yucky to me. So we can remember from the past. We classify objects into categories. This allows humans to create internal representations of objects, mental representations, which have the same attraction or avoidance characteristics as objects in the real world. Okay? So, I've just been talking to you about disgusting dog poop. As I've been talking to you about that, you've made a mental image in your head of dog poop. I assume most of you are experiencing that image in your mind. I say dog poop, you have an image of it and you're going, ugh, disgusting, right? I mean, maybe there's some of you guys are a little weird that think it's wonderful, but I'm going to say for most of you, you think that's disgusting, right? On the other hand, I could say something like most of us are going to find attractive, like how about like a delicious chocolate donut with sprinkles, a really nice one, beautifully made, perfect. I go down to the Erewhon store and I get the vegan one. It costs $7. Like that's a treat for myself. $7 donut. It's delicious, right? So think of and now you think, oh, that's really good. I'd like to have a donut right now and be eating it, right? That's a pleasurable thing, right? So, but those are mental representations of real things, right? There's no real dog poop in this room. Check my shoes. No real dog poop in this room, right? There's no donuts, unless somebody brought some, I don't know, anybody bring a donut? No donuts in here, but we have mental representations of those things. That makes sense? So they're objects in the real world that we create a mental representation of, okay? We've classified these things, good and bad, right? The internal objects then become laden with affect, with emotions related to pleasure and pain. So that donut in your mind, that image of the donut, you're thinking, the last time I had a donut was so delicious and maybe something else good happened, you know. And then the last time I had to deal with the poop, it was really a drag, and oh, it's disgusting smell, you know, right? So again, you have affect related to pleasure and to pain. Okay? But you also, but again, the tricky part is the pain, you know, leaving the poop also gives pleasure. Subsequently, these internal objects and the feelings attached to them can be attached to other objects in the external world. By relating to objects in the external world, humans can access the affect states attached to internal objects. So let's say, you know, I have this internal representation of a delicious chocolate donut, but I don't have a chocolate donut here. But I'm walking along and I see, oh, he's eating something, you know, like, wow, it's a bagel, donut-like, round, like a donut, you know, it looks pretty good. And so that pleasure I had from the donut, I'm now attaching to this. Okay, it's not the donut, but I'm now attaching it to that. Does that make sense? Right? The pleasure I had, the disgust I felt when I saw the poop, and then I left. Oh, I hate that poop. It's disgusting. I'm getting away from it. I feel relief. I feel good, right? But let's say I see something else that reminds, you know, that's negative. Like, let's say I see, I don't know, I got to think of something here. Let's say I see, you know, no, that's also disgusting. Let's say I see somebody wearing brown shoes. You know, anybody got brown shoes on here? Close enough. Brown shoes, black shoes. You know, oh, brown shoes. He's got brown shoes. All right, brown shoes. You know, and I'm like, wait for this. Now I feel some pleasure, right? So I'm avoiding those. Or I just feel disgusted. I may not know it reminds me of poop, by the way, consciously. I said, for some reason I don't like brown shoes, right? Coming to psychoanalysis, put you on the couch for a few years, we'll realize that the brown, you know, I'll realize that the brown shoe disgust is related to poop. But it'll take a few years of analysis to come out of my unconscious. I just don't know, you know, I'm not attracted to those, okay? So those affects get attached to things in the real world, okay?
So is it kind of like how if you have, say you have food poisoning on a hot dog for like a whole year, and even if you just see or smell a hot dog, you get sick? Yeah.
So my friend, we used to go to a Vietnamese place, I won't mention which one it is, all the time. You know, we ate there like at least once a week. He went there one time without me, and he got food poisoning. And that's it for him. Every time I say, let's go to get Vietnamese food, because we now have Vietnamese, by the way, that's not the Vietnamese places in town here. Both are excellent, by the way. So I said to him, hey, let's go get lunch at the Vietnamese place in Camarillo. He's like, oh no, I can't eat Vietnamese food anymore. Ugh. He's now associated that incident with all Vietnamese food. He's generalized all Vietnamese food. So that's a good example. Yeah. Right. Okay. I'm going to get back to this picture in a minute. I'll talk to you about that. So, let's apply this idea, this basic sort of human biology, psychology to fetishes. Males develop fetishes for objects, body parts, things associated with body parts, things associated with body parts, and then other things even, okay? Most male fetishes have some relationship to the female body. In other words, men have found something in the female body pleasurable. There's something innate. This is innate. You don't have to go learn this. You know, you're probably born with this. There's something, at least for most males, something innate in the female body is pleasurable, means pleasure. So having sex with a female is pleasurable, right? But let's say, like the donut, you don't have a female, I don't have a donut, and what do I have instead is somebody's half-eaten bagel, right? So I'm a man, I don't have a female partner, an actual female, but what I have is something that reminds me of a female, that then those pleasurable feelings I have toward a female, I now put onto the thing that reminds me of the female, okay? And so then what I do is then I experience pleasure when I interact with that thing. Okay? Just like the donut. I don't have the real donut, but there's a half-eaten bagel. So I take that instead. So for males find something that reminds them of the female body pleasurable. Okay? Now, why would males need to do this? Because throughout human history, fewer human males have impregnated most of the women. I talked about this before. Right? We are the descendants of fewer men and many mothers. Okay, remember I talked about this? Okay, that people were much more polygamous back in the day. And what this means is that some guys never got to have sex with a woman. So in human history, there's always guys who end up not, and again, I'm talking about human history, not modern times, because modern times this is probably not really so much the case. But there were guys who they weren't high up enough on the dominance hierarchy. They could not end up having sex with an actual female. And yet we know from that picture I showed you of all those penises of the three species, right? Remember the gorillas and the chimpanzees and the human male in the middle? That human males have a pretty high sex drive. And they have a pretty high sex drive because of what? Sperm competition. Okay? Pretty high sex drive. Okay? So men have this curse of having a high sex drive. I'm talking about, again, throughout human history, having a high sex drive, but not always having a woman available to have sex with. So what does that high sex drive then become, is use the Freudian term cathected to, attached to? It becomes attached to something that reminds them of a female. And then they can masturbate and deal with that high sex drive that they have, okay, relatively speaking, relative to other primates, relative to your great ape, right? Human males have a high sex drive. Yes?
So you're saying that they, like, what you're talking about is like attaching it to like objects not part of like the female body, because like...
Yes. Very good. It could be part of the female body. It could also be part of the female body. So this is the kind of thing about fetishes. It's very interesting. So it could be, so one thing you can think of, and I'll talk about this in a minute. I can talk about it here, that it could be that men are, I mean, one thing you can think about this is that men, and again, I'm talking about heterosexual men, so again, I'm not disincluding gay people. Just for simplicity's sake, we'll talk about heterosexual men, that men are basically innately drawn to parts of the female body because this has survival value, right? Men are drawn to women's breasts because that's, when you're a baby, that's where lunch comes from. When you see a woman who has, breasts that either remind you that she's fertile, they remind you that she could feed a child, right? And so those things become, again, this is all unconscious, these things become attractive, okay? Just like men are attracted to signs of fertility in women. What do we find attractive in women? What do men find attractive in women? They find the idea that a woman is fertile is very important. And so there's lots of things, there's signs of fertility, fecundity in women that men find really attractive. Small feet. If women have small feet, that's a sign of, lots of good estrogen, right? And so men like feet, they like small feet, right? The Chinese, as a culture, had a 1,000-year-long foot fetish of small feet, where they would do foot binding. They would bind women's feet and sort of force them into gross, grotesque, folding in on themselves version, because that was something that was attractive. And again, if you think of it evolutionarily, that's a way to make women more attractive, is to make their feet at least appear small. It lasted 1,000 years in China. 1,000 years. The United States has only been around 250 years. 1,000 years, 4 times longer than the United States. Women were doing, and this was something forced on women. And women would do this to each other. And this is like, this is highly abusive. I mean, women would be basically crippled from this foot binding. I have a whole lecture on foot binding, and we're not going to have time to get to it this semester, unfortunately. But this is an example of this. Other things, lips being, plump, all sorts of things. The shape of the back end, all these kind of things. The ratio of the body, like different ratios, hip to waist ratio, these kind of things. All these things that men visually cue men into attractiveness of women. Okay. The other thing, and I should mention this now, the other thing that's really important is neoteny. You guys know what this word is? This means that this is where somebody appears to be younger, appears to be more juvenile. And there's a whole interesting thing about neoteny in evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology. It's really fascinating that human beings, we as human beings appear like immature versions of our hominid ancestors, that we seem more childlike. We have bigger, rounder heads. We seem, more kawaii, as the Japanese would say, cute, right? We find when we look at animals like puppies, why do we think puppies are so adorable? Because they look immature. Okay? And so we have this whole thing about immaturity, right? It's something that's not quite mature. And this carries over to men's attraction to females. Men are attracted to females who appear younger. And so when you see depictions of females, sexy females, you'll often see this sort of exaggeration of their youth, right? And this is a good example, comes from anime, right? The big eyes, the bigger head in relationship to body size, this reminds you of a younger person. It triggers two things. First of all, and then also along with the secondary sexual characteristics, the large breast, hip to waist ratio, these kind of things, this triggers in males, something that is sexually desirable. This is why you see all the anime characters, and also there's a little bit of this for women, but the effect is not so pronounced for women as it is for men. Okay? Women tend to just find men who are sort of average neoteny figures, just sort of average for human to be fine. Men tend to like the things that show the women to be a little younger, a little bit more fecund. And so anime women drawn in anime are a great example of this. If you go and look, the women look young, they also look very sexy, and men, and because how many men watch anime, and it's like billions and billions now, they find this attractive. And this is the theory is this is why. Why would men develop this attraction for these sort of younger women? There's an interesting theory about this. And it goes along with another evolutionary thing that human beings possibly have. Over human evolution, what happened is that women tended to live longer, and they lived past past the age of fertility. In other words, women developed menopause. Okay, and there's a lot of theories about this, which we don't need to go into. But what happened is you live in a society where women may or may not be fertile. You may have a lot of grandmothers around. Right? And that's something that probably in human history probably evolved because that had survival value. Having your grandmother around meant your kid had a better chance of surviving, right? Anybody here interact with their grandmother when they were a kid? The grandmothers became and grandfathers too, but grandmothers became very important as part of the family to help raise the kids. And there was a survival value to that. One of the theories is this is why women developed having menopause and live a long time, maybe live a little bit longer than men on average, because they have to stick around and be grandmothers because this has got huge survival value. Okay? But men now have to distinguish between the women who are fertile and those who are not. And so the theory goes that these obvious signs of neoteny, if the woman has more signs of neoteny, that means she's also more likely to be fertile because she's more likely to be younger. Okay, to a certain point, right? If she's just a child, then she's not going to be fertile, but she's not going to have the body of a woman. So again, this neoteny along with these secondary sexual characteristics, right, become very attractive to men. And this is why, by the way, these anime guys figure this out. This makes these characters very popular, so they draw them this way. Okay? But you can also see this in sort of just modern depictions of women, right? And there's all sorts of theories, from makeup to whatever, the way women dress. This is something that's gone on through human history, that men tend to find these younger women attractive because they're more likely to be fertile. That's the theory anyway. It comes from this guy. It's an interesting paper. I highly recommend if you're interested. This isn't the only paper, but this is the latest one I read about this. You can read about this. It's a very interesting paper by this guy, Jones et al. Here. He's at Cambridge somewhere. And I recommend reading this. And you could probably get this in the library if you want. And probably next year I'll require this paper as a reading for this class. I think it's very interesting. Right. Any questions about this so far? So just so you know, I'm not making this up. Other people have read this. Okay? So, all right, that's a little side thing to the fetishes. So again, reiterate, human males evolve high sex drive due to sperm competition, but they don't necessarily have access to women all the time to satisfy that sex drive. So they then do, like I did with the donut and the bagel, they basically settle for the bagel, and what they do is that is something that is related to femaleness. Now, it could be a female body part, right? And again, you could have a question in your mind whether a guy likes women's breasts or a guy likes a woman's bottom, and maybe he's a little obsessed with that. Is that a fetish? It's possible that could be a fetish. So you could even think just parts of a woman's body could be fetishized, right? We talk about the fetishization of women. Women are they're just objects, sexual objects. Well, I think, my opinion is there's a strong tendency probably for men to do this. And so again, if you're a guy and you have a somewhat feminist bent, you've got to sort of watch yourself, right? That you're not doing this, right? Because you do have a big brain, by the way, and you can override some of this programming. You have to watch yourself with this stuff, right? Just like you have to watch yourself that you're not like, some sort of primate, alpha male going around and, marauding another village and killing off all the males and raping the females. That's something that is in part of our programming, but we don't, we try not to do that, right? Because that's a bad thing. We have some, we've got these big brains. So again, I'm not saying these things to be deterministic about it, but this explains. So one thing you can think of is that men have this sort of, in bed built, fetish for whatever is femaleness, right? But then those things become elaborated onto other stuff. Now, what is the body part that men? I'm jumping ahead here. What's the body part men most? Besides the obvious things, the genitals and the chest. What are the other things? What's the most obvious female body part that men fetishize? It's the most common one. Feet. Feet are the most common fetish, and we know that feet are an indicator of fertility, fecundity, And the guys who fetishize feet, they don't fetishize typically big hobbit feet, big hairy hobbit feet. They fetishize, delicate, female-looking feet, right? Yes.
I guess my question is because you're saying that they develop these when women aren't around, but then what in the case of the foot when you need a woman around to get her ass?
So this is the problem or the opportunity, however you want to look at it. If you're used to, let's say you're a guy and you don't have a girlfriend, because you've been that guy over there, but you come to my weekend seminar, learn how to be a badass, shoot a machine gun, ride a motorcycle, do a little karate. Now you're kind of a little badasser. You go back to the bar, and now the woman, this guy's really good. Your friends vet him, and now she hooks up with you, and now you have a relationship with an actual woman. Well, this is great, right? An actual woman, and you get to have sex with her. But it's been a long time, or maybe never, since you've had an actual woman to have sex with. And all you've been doing in the meantime is masturbating to feet videos, right? Now you're with the real woman, and now you've learned through, as you guys all know from Behaviorism 101, right, association, you will learn to become aroused to feet. So now, in order to have good sex with your actual woman, you have to have some feet involvement. Right? So maybe you have to use the feet for various things, and again, you can go on the internet and see how people use feet for various sexual things. Hopefully you have an understanding girlfriend that will allow you to, do stuff with her feet, as long as you're also helping, satisfying her or whatever, right? But that could be a problem, because that's association. This now become a behavioral association, right? Stimulus response association. It's feet, I get aroused, and you need the feet to be aroused, right? If that becomes distressing, you can't have sex with your girlfriend. You can't come to orgasm with your girlfriend. You can only come to orgasm by masturbating to feet videos. That can now become a distressing thing. If that becomes distressing enough, that's where it becomes a pathology. Okay. If it's not a pathology, you just want your girlfriend to rub her feet on your chest while you're having sex with her, and she likes that and you like it. You're all good. Right? But you can't have sex with an actual woman because you've had the associations become so strong to feet. Now you need to get some help, right? Now you might need to get some help. Now the good thing is those things can be unlearned, because now you got not only feet, but you got the rest of her too, right? So there's learning opportunity here, right? So most people don't have a problem with that, but a lot of people may retain, a lot of guys may retain aspects of that foot fetish. Hey baby, let me see your feet. Oh, I really like those shoes you got. I bought you a brand new pair of shoes. Women like shoes, right? Women's shoes show off their feet and they show off the foot shape. They also raise them up to high heels so their butts stick out more. Guys get cued into this. And so maybe the guy, what he does is he buys his girlfriend really nice shoes. And he really likes to look at her in those shoes, and she loves having the shoes, and all's good, right? That may be enough, or it could be something more severe. So the thing about these is a really huge variation here. And this is true for all human sexuality. A huge variation across the board of all these things. And so this is the thing that, hopefully we're all tolerant of, and we try to not be very rigid about things. When you become rigid about something, that's where the pathology comes in. I can only have an orgasm if there's a foot and I'm watching it on the video, right? There's a whole lot of thing about internet porn in this now. This is a whole other subject which I don't have time to get into today because we're going to run out of time. But internet porn, now a lot of people are theorizing, is making these associations very strongly, like stronger than before. Because I can watch, foot fetish videos all day long, like 24/7, 365, and so that association becomes hugely powerful. And then real women, that's a hassle. I don't even want to deal with it. I just got my foot fetish in my video, stay in my room and watch videos. And some people are theorizing that that's going to be something catastrophic, because this is the first time in history where human males have had unlimited access to visual sexual stimulation. Right? When I was a kid, back in the Jurassic era, we wanted to see some porn. We had to go find somebody's dad who had a Playboy stashed under the bed and steal it, for like 5 minutes before the dad would find out and look at it, and put it back, right? It was hard to get porn. It was very difficult, and you were lucky to get anything, right? You hear all these stories about these young guys, masturbating to some women's magazine, like some kind of thing. It's not like it is today. Today, it's just exactly opposite. I mean, it's 24/7. Anything you want to see, you can go on the internet right now and see it for free, right? All the regular sexual stuff. You're so bored of it, you can go watch Buck Angel. So this is a new era, and so we do not know yet what the consequences of this is going to be. There's a lot of speculation now. There's a lot of speculation about how, this is going to be the end of days now, and this is going to cause the human race to to be destroyed. All sorts of stuff out there. You hear stuff. But, I think it's probably something that should be of concern, because what's happened in some countries is that the number of young people actually hooking up has become very low. This is true in Japan.
There's a study here published recently.
And it's also, yes.
25% of men, 25 to 34 or something.
Also happening here now, yes. And this is speculations. This is due to the internet. Because I'm a man, so just visual stimulation is overwhelming. So I just do this all day. Why do I bother with a female? Or now I have to actually develop social skills to interact with a real female. That becomes a problem. So this is very interesting. And so I think the long-term consequences of this, we still have to see what happens with this. The idea that people don't want to have sex, it's just too, this is what kids in Japan are saying. It's just too much of a hassle, I'd rather stay home and play video games. Video game playing, also activating those dopamine centers in the brain that, having a pleasant relationship with another person might activate. So again, this is very interesting, what kind of society that you guys are going to have in the future here. It's going to be very interesting to see this. I don't think it's a good idea. Personally, my personal feeling is, again, this is just take it with a grain of salt. My personal feeling is I think it's great if you guys actually hook up with a real human being. I think this is really good. I think there's something really to be said by having a close relationship with another person who's not in your family of origin. I think you learn a tremendous amount about yourself and being human. I think it's really important. But that's just not just the sexual stuff, which is also great, but the actual interaction with somebody I think is really important for people's growth. I'm biased as a psychologist about this, but I think it's important. The other thing that's coming up that's going to be also throw a monkey wrench into this whole thing is the advent of sex robots. They've done some research on sex robots and perception of sex robots. As you might be not surprised to find out, women are less interested in sex robots. Men, as you might expect, very interested, right? So, why bother all these fetishes? Why should I have to have the half-eaten bagel Here's the donut over here. I can just have its really good vegan equivalent, right? It's not quite the real thing, but it's close enough. It's pretty close, right? And as AI gets better and as technology gets better, these sex robots become closer and closer and closer to the experience of having sex with an actual female. And so, of course, the male interest in this stuff is really huge, and they have these now, and they're becoming more and more realistic. They cost a lot of money, which is the big barrier now. As soon as these things start to be mass-produced, we're going to have massive societal changes. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens, and this is just coming right around the corner. Right now, a not very smart but somewhat realistic-looking sex robot is about $5 to $10 grand, and when that comes down to be $500 to $1,000, you're going to see society going through massive change. That's my prediction. Come tell me in 10 years if I'm wrong about that, but that's right on the verge of happening now. And a lot of places saying, we're going to ban the sex robots. Yeah, good luck, because I bet you they're going to make them in China for $200 a pop, and they're going to be very realistic, and it's just coming down the pike. So it'll be very interesting. Yes?
I could be wrong, but I think I heard they're talking about opening the first robot brothel.
Yes, I heard about that. Yes, yes. I think it's somewhere in Eastern Europe, maybe. They may have already done it. Yeah, the first robot brothel they're going to open up. Yeah. So women. I've talked to women about this. Women are either just completely disgusted by this, or they're like, yeah, whatever. That's the reactions I've been getting from women talking about this. I don't know. What do you guys think? What do the women think about sex robots? They have sex robots for women too, by the way. So just so you know, you're not left out. And they're just as realistic as the male robots. So don't feel like you're being left out on this. They'll be available for you if you want them. But what do you think about this? What do you think about men? What do you think about? How would you feel if your boyfriend was doing it with a sex robot? Would you care? And again, there's a lot of variation of this, right? Like some women don't want their boyfriends to masturbate. Some women couldn't care less. I mean, it really depends, right, on the individual. But there's a lot of variation of this. So this is going to be really interesting to see what happens. This is going to be a total upheaval of society, my theory, right? I wanted to get rid of the wars in the Middle East. I wanted to get rid of ISIS. You know how I would do it? I wouldn't bomb them. I would just drop like about 10,000 sex robots, and then all these guys are going to get terribly distracted from shooting people. That's my theory anyway. I don't know if it would work, but Yes.
It's funny. It reminds me of like this Rick and Morty episode where the sex robots, like the females evolve to like just keep the men like with sex robots.
Yeah.
And they take their sperm from the sex robots and like.
Yeah. Well, there's actually some science fiction stories like that, and the closest thing we have in real life is there's a tribe. I think they're down in the Amazon somewhere, and the women stay to themselves, and they only have sex with the guys if the guys can show them that they have some sort of fitness. So the guys go out and hunt something. Look, I got meat. I'll share this with you, but you have to have sex with me, right? Sounds a little prostitution-like, but I don't mean it in that sense. I don't mean it in that sense, but I mean in the sense that the women basically hang out with each other, and the guys are sort of a life support system for sperm, right? And unfortunately, in that society, when the women have kids, the kids are just left to run off by themselves. They don't take care of the kids very well, and they're considered to be kind of they characterize as a psychopathic society. They have more psychopathic characteristics than other societies. It's very interesting. So that you could see that kind of thing happening. It could, women. God, these guys are really just too difficult to deal with, right? So let them have the sex robots. We'll collect the sperm. We don't need them around. Great. So my friend Wendy Walsh, the TV psychologist who teaches here, she says that women are going to be taken over pretty soon. Because the women are the ones getting the college degrees. By the way, you know that a lot of guys now are not going to college. It's very, very common. And that more women are now going to college than guys. I think it's a 3-to-1 ratio or something. It's really becoming really quite pronounced. So, by the way, kudos to you guys who are here in college. You need to finish, by the way. It's good because it's going to be women are going to be the educated ones. The idea is that women are going to be the educated ones. They're going to be driving society. They're going to be running things because they're the ones getting education. They're the ones who are going to have the high status jobs. And the guys are basically going to be like cleaning pools and, asking you, what kind of, if you like fries with your burger. That seems to be the trend right now. So, so this Wendy says that what will happen is that women will run everything and the guys will become things, all these sexual mores will change, and maybe this will be one of the things that happens. I don't know, I think it's important for you guys to go to college and get through. And, I mean, look around you, the psych major is a good example of this. How many guys are in here now? You know, look at this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys, and the rest of you guys are 7 guys, the rest of you guys are women. This is typical in the major, okay? This is typical in the major, and you know, when I was going to school, it would have been the exact opposite in psychology. It would have been 70% males and 30% women. Now it's completely flipped around. This is also true at the graduate level. So, you know, this is going to be a brave new world, guys. You know, the good or the bad thing is that you may have sex robots in it in the future. So I don't know how this is going to all play out. It's going to be really interesting to see this, you know. But the idea basically here is that these objects form a sort of relief valve when women are not available for men. Okay? Now, women also can have fetishes. So it's not just men have fetishes. Women do have fetishes. This is much, much less often than men. And I think I have a quote here somewhere. When you have a putative disorder, and again, I'm not talking disorder, that is 50 to 100 times more prevalent in one gender than another, we must consider the possibility that we're looking at design rather than disorder, and a socio-cultural label rather than a biological reality. Okay? This is also something seen in animals. So we see this, you know, one of the proofs we have for this theories of male sexuality is that male animals can also form and have fetishes. And we see this in chimps. And this is the video I should show you. It's going to basically put you off your lunch. But I also want to mention sexual imprinting. This is also something that's been studied. It occurs at a relatively young age, all the way to adolescence. Usually happens very early on in the parent of the opposite sex. By the way, if you're Tibetan Buddhist, they claim this happens during reincarnation, after death and before being reborn. So take my 344 class and I'll talk all about that. For males, it's very easy for this imprinting to become generalized to anything resembling any parts of the femaleness. Okay, any parts of femaleness. So again, you know, this is typically seen that, you know, males, you know, get imprinted on female body parts very early on. It may be built in, it may be happen very early on. And then again, this is the idea that where fetishes may come from. And again, we see this in animals. And a good example of this was an example of a chimp that had a boot fetish. Did the boot remind the chimp of a female in heat? Because female chimps have their buttocks get sort of red and enlarged. Or is it related to the care of the keeper who wears the boot? Or is there some combo confusion of both together? But basically the boot fetish is this guy would walk around the zookeeper and the chimp would come and hump his boot. You know, so you can ask about this. We've seen other examples of fetishes in the animal kingdom. Conrad Lawrence, the somewhat Nazi biologist who wrote a lot about animal behavior, wrote about this. He raised ducks and geese, and he's talking about a duck who was attempting to copulate with his boot. So again, maybe an example of fetish. I will show you a short video and then let you take a break. This should put you off your lunch. Fetish in the animal kingdom. This is a chimp in a zoo, I believe, in Hawaii. And he has in his hand a frog. So you get the general idea, enough of that. That's the chimp versus frog video. So a couple lessons from this. One is that, you know, again, you see chimps are another animal that have, you know, high sperm competition, high sex drive. And again, here no outlet. And so the frog becomes a convenient substitute. Okay. So yes, I feel my proudest accomplishment in life is that I had the URL to this video entered in, and a reference to this video entered into the congressional record as part of my testimony in front of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. It's been downhill since then. That was my greatest, dare I say, my greatest prank of all time. You know, I should not have this on video, but this is now in the congressional record, the chimp versus frog video. So I'm very proud of that. The other thing is that you do not want to do bad things in this life and be reincarnated as a frog. So I think you do not want to be a frog in your next life. So do good things to each other. Do good things. So let's talk a little bit about women. So women don't develop fetishes for things as often as men, but we're now finding that women may develop something called objectum sexuality, which is an emotional attachment to a thing. And they may do this more than men. And so this is a thing that's just come out recently. I had to talk about this on TV, and I didn't know about this till the TV producers asked me, hey, do you know anything about this objectum sexuality? We're going to do a piece on this. And I'm like, I know nothing about that. And so I went back and did some research on this and found out a little bit about this. And this is where women develop a romantic attachment to something like the Berlin Wall or the Eiffel Tower or a fence or an object. And again, this is an emotional attachment. There may be sexual activity involved, but the emotional attachment comes first. And one way you can think of this is a theory I have, is that this may be related to Asperger's syndrome or a little bit of autism, like where maybe the person has a really hard time picking up on social cues from another person, but they really need to develop a strong emotional attachment to something. And so then it becomes easier to do this with an object than another person. This is very under-researched. So this is an excellent subject for a doctoral dissertation to look at this objectum sexuality. It's really quite fascinating. Mostly women, but we're not really sure because it's been so understudied. We don't know if maybe there might be more men who are involved in this. In the case that I was researching for the TV show, they found this guy in the Netherlands who supposedly had objectum sexuality for his bicycles. He had all these bicycles and he was in love with his bicycles. But on closer scrutiny, it appeared the thing he found attractive about the bicycles was the rubber in the tire. And immediately I started thinking about the chimp in the boot fetish, the rubber boot fetish, and I thought, yeah, I bet really what this is going on is this is not like objectum sexuality for this guy. This is really more about a fetish. Right? So for men, I always suspect the fetish first. For women, I'm always looking to see if there's an emotional thing going on. So even women who have overt fetishes or overt paraphilias, a lot of times they may be doing that at the instance of a guy so they can develop an emotional attachment with the guy. So that's my theory about it, that women may actually be involved in fetishes initially because of an emotional need, emotional attachment need, and then maybe through association they learn to associate some pleasure with the object and then they develop a fetish. So the development of women for fetishes, how women develop fetishes as opposed to how men develop fetishes, would be another very, very, very interesting study. It could probably be done with surveys, meaning that somebody could probably do that as a 301 study, where you survey people and ask them, if they're into women, if they're into fetishes, how did they get into it, and what were the steps before they became interested in it. I would be very interested in that. I don't know if you could do that here. Somebody might complain. I always worry about stuff because I know somebody's going to go and say, "Oh, guess what Vulcans are, chimp and frog," and so they get back to the president and they're going to come and talk to me and say, But I think, again, if as a psychologist, we can't shy away from, the difficult questions, and I think these are the awkward questions to ask, and I think these would be very interesting. I think it's quite possible women could have a, different thing going on here, and this also may be related to autism. I'm really curious about that. Asperger's disease. Very curious about that. And again, not that all women who have autism or Asperger's fall in love with fences in the Eiffel Tower. That's not necessarily the case, but I think there may be something related here. And you guys can look that up. I don't have time to show you the video, so you guys can look that up online if you want. Now, let's talk about paraphilias in general now. So now we've gone from the general, which is who has these things, how they developed. Let's talk about some of them, actually just some of what these are. Okay. So paraphilias, let me give you a good example to begin with. Well, we'll speed this up here. This is Natasha. And what's she doing? Why is this not? Is there sound in this? There should be sound here. Hold on a second. This needs the sound actually. Or it won't.
It's muted right there.
Was it muted?
YouTube video.
Oh. Nope. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. Oh, sound's going. So maybe this is the video is not working. All right. Well, this will be less impactful without sound. So what's she doing? She's blowing up a balloon. Attractive girl blowing up a balloon. Oh, here we go. Music. Okay, what happens when you blow up a balloon and keep blowing it up? Anybody getting anxious watching this? You getting anxious? What's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? Oh no! Everybody's heart racing? That's a big damn balloon. You're uncomfortable? Oh, I can't watch this anymore. What's gonna happen? Come on, keep watching. Don't turn your eyes away. How can you not? Oh, there we go. It pops. Oh, now anybody feel that rush of excitement? Oh, relief?
No.
That awkwardness has now gone away as the balloon popped? Anybody feel that? A little bit? No? No? Well, obviously you're not a good candidate for a balloon fetish. So this is a balloon fetish. These guys are called ballooners. Or they call themselves ballooners. I did a whole TV episode on this. I should have showed you my TV episode. Why am I showing you this? What happens is there's two aspects to the fetish. One is that you just like to have balloons around and feel the balloons and, you know, rub them all over you. Usually it's mostly males. Or it's women who seem to be in a relationship with a male who does this, who also like to do this. But usually it's males. These women are just getting paid to do this, by the way. It's mostly males like to watch this, and they like they get the actual balloons and they rub them all over themselves, and it feels good. The women, the balloon, the roundness of the balloon, probably reminding of female body parts. That's the theory. The other aspect of it is the balloon going up and then suddenly popping, and that moment of excitement and relief when the balloon pops. Also, some guys find this sexually exciting. And you can imagine, right? And so if you think about fetishes, the idea that these start when you're in early childhood, right? And something that's imprinted on you. So you're a little kid, you know, anybody remember your little kid and you went to a birthday party and there was balloons and somebody popped a balloon and went, ah, you know, and you're having fun, you're eating cake and the balloon's popping and there's all this pleasure. And as a kid, the pleasure is diffuse, right? And so as you're an adult, what happens is that pleasure becomes centered on the genitals. So now the pleasure becomes something sexual. And so then you watch these movies or you pop, you do the balloon thing you can do either. You can either watch the films of it or you can actually do it yourself, right? And so you'll find guys, usually guys, some women who are into this stuff and these balloon things, all right? So this is a common, very typical fetish. It's not common, but it's typical. Balloon fetish. And this one I can show you without being too prurient, you know, because I don't want to show you people having sex with their feet and stuff, because it's just, you know, really we're going to have lunch in a minute, and, you know, we don't want to, you know. Again, not that there's anything wrong with it. By the way, I want to be very clear about it here. I'm not, well, I do have a value judgment about, this. I do have some value judgment about, because this involves, in some cases, hurting another creature, which I am dead set against. I fully subscribe to the Hindu idea of ahimsa, non-injury to other beings, so I don't like this. But if they're crushing a grape, fine. You know, I don't care. Grapes, I don't worry about grape pain, right? But I do worry about animals, so I don't like this. And otherwise, you know, no judgment about these things, right? You know, you like fetishes, you like the Eiffel Tower, you like fetishes, fine, right? No problem. Exhibitionism, another common one.
Hello, what's your name? Sophia. Sophia. And why are you here today? Because I want to masturbate. You want to masturbate? Yes. You know, most of the population masturbates, but not very many people masturbate, like, kind of publicly for the internet. So what is the appeal in doing that? this feels more like a place where I can play around with what is really going on, what really turns at least myself off. And yeah, I think that's empowering. And
There you go. Maybe she has a exhibitionism fetish, or maybe a paraphilia, or maybe she's just getting paid. We don't know. Voyeurism. You know about this one? Again, this has become so common now because of the internet. I mean, there's voyeur things. There's cameras everywhere. This is just an example of a sporting match. I don't know if they're playing cricket here. And I just want you to notice the camera. The cameraman is shooting this match.
The 22-over match, 12 overs gone. It's 50 runs on the board with some damage. Australia won the toss and elected to field first. Over condition rain around the ground.
Cricket.
She's looking the wrong way.
Yeah, she's looking the wrong way, all right. Yeah, so there you go. That's a good example of cameraman board. For Taj, this is rubbing up against people. I'm going to talk about this in a second. This is a commercial. So watch this carefully. It says, exposure to sunlight may be more dangerous than you thought. She has a sunburn, right? So she thinks she did it. Sorry, not a very good quality of the video. Anyway, so this is just some ideas of different fetishes. I don't know what's in here. No, that one's not there anymore. Okay. So we can look at these different fetishes and look at a relative frequency of sexual preferences relating to two preference categories. Okay. Just to give you an idea here. So here are different fetishes. Body part features are predominantly the largest fetish category. So it has to do with body parts. Again, this goes along with the theory. The second thing is other people's behaviors, your own behavior, other people's behavior. And then the third one is an object associated with some external event. So that you can even fold that into the top one. So this just shows you that objects, things, have a lot to do with fetishes. And this comes from an article in Nature. Oops, sorry about that. Darn it. What am I doing here? Okay. So again, if we look at preference categories here, so you can see it sort of done this way. There's quite a lot of people here they've looked at. The objects associated with bodies are body part features are by large, and behavior other. These things tend to make up most of the paraphilias. Some external objects, again, I don't, but these are probably distantly related to female body parts. Okay, they may be a couple steps removed. Remember, we have big brains and imagination, so these are probably also related to female body parts. Social behavior here, external events. Own behavior, not much. Okay, so this is the preferences. Again, so we look at here, overall, we look at see things, we see voyeurism. Again, if you look at these categories, you'll see, again, men are predominantly more interested in these things than women. These are paraphilias, they're not necessarily fetishes. So when you start talking about paraphilias in the bigger category, you see that a lot more women are interested in paraphilias because paraphilias include social situations. And they can include emotional attachments and things that women are more, maybe, ideally, maybe a little more into. So you see here, the largest one for men, especially, is voyeurism. Not surprising, men are hardwired directly. So this makes perfect sense. That men, and again, with the rise of the internet, and voyeurism is so easy to do. You just turn your computer on and you can watch any kind of people having sex of any kind that you want to see. You can even watch people having sex live. Now there's all sorts of webcam sites, of women and men and couples and gay people and trans people or whatever having sex in front of you live on the camera. I mean, so voyeurism is just going to shoot off the charts now. Okay? Roughly twice as many more men interested in women. Fetishism. Okay, fetishism. They have down here both men and women about equal, which I find surprising. So we have to think about that. We have to see how they define that, because this should not be as many women there. So that's an interesting finding. Exhibitionism, a little bit more men. Frotteurism, women typically don't like being groped on buses and trains. Masochism, the theory is that women will like this more than men, and that turns out to be true. So there, score 1 point for Freud. Sadism, men would like this a little more than women. That seems to be true. Another point for Freud. Transvestism, cross-dressing. Strict exhibitionism, I'm not sure what that is. Sex with a child, pedophilia, we should talk a little bit about that. Well, Deb talked to you about pedophilia a lot, so I'm not going to go into that much. You see more men than women are pedophiles by a pretty big amount. Okay. And then we could, I don't know, did she talk to you about pedophilia and like ages and age ranges and things like that? Okay, good on. Okay, so this is an odd finding here about the fetishism. I wonder how they define fetishism. I should probably look that up next time I talk about this. Okay, well, let's talk about some other weird ones. Any questions? So most common fetish is foot fetish, and then, or you could say, if you want to include, the secondary sexual characteristics of females as fetish objects, you can include those. But absent those, foot fetish is the biggest one, and then it goes on down the list, okay? And paraphilias, voyeurism is the biggest one, and you go on down the list, okay? Let's talk about some of the weird ones that we don't like. Bestiality is an interesting one. Bestiality, or if you want to look at it in a different way, you can call it zoophilia. Zoophilia means love of animals. That can take on many different forms. Many of us love our animals. I love my dog. I have a little puppy now. He's so cute. I just curl up with him and we go to sleep together and I pet him and he's wonderful. I don't find the dog to be sexually attractive in the slightest. That seems really, really alien and weird to me, that people would look at an animal like a dog and find it sexually attractive. But again, remember, humans have big brains, and so they are able to do all sorts of stuff. So what we're going to really talk about is bestiality as a paraphilia. It would technically be paraphilia, but you could also think of the animal sort of as a fetish object, a la the chimp and the frog. Okay, so you take your choice whether it's a paraphilia or fetish. I think it could be either one. Okay. So bestiality. So I'll show you something now that puts you off your lunch. Let's see.
Did eventually meet Ken, who shares her sexual preference.
Oh, we need to grab a couple handfuls of that smaller stuff. Okay. Some of this. I was technically a virgin until I was 29 years old. I was a zoophile up until then, and I just basically didn't have much interest in other members of my own species as far as a life bond or anything. But when I met Ellie here, we clicked. It was the one person that I felt within a week probably after I met her. We were meant to be together. Sit over here.
Ken and Ellie met through a zoo friend on the internet. After a few weeks, they arranged their first date.
Well, the first night that he came up to visit me, I took him down to the barn to introduce him to some of my horses and some of the other horses that I enjoyed at the barn. And I took him in and introduced him to my miniature stallion. And I don't know if it was subconscious, I was very nervous and kind of wanted to do the shock factor, as it were. My miniature stallion was dropped and masturbating. When his penis is dropped and he slaps it on his belly, they call that masturbation for stallions. And so one thing led to another and I couldn't resist, so I bent down and started sucking on him. And then he tried climbing on top of me, so the next thing I know, my pants are down and I'm bending over for him and I'm like, excuse me, I can't resist. And I guess part of me said, okay, either he's for real and he won't mind this, or he's not for real and he's going to be totally freaked out by it and run. Obviously he didn't run.
No, actually, I was very tempted at the point to have sloppy seconds. It turned me on. It was so erotic to watch this, and just the whole thing. And it didn't shock me at all. In fact, I was like, "This is pretty cool." I think I found somebody here that might be on my plane here, and it went from there. And here we are, married.
Yeah. Well, I have vaginal sex with my miniature stallion. He's not a whole lot larger than most humans. He is a bit bigger, but not uncomfortably so. And I like to suck on him orally, and he especially enjoys that.
I have anal sex with the miniature stallion. He penetrates me, and it's pleasurable, but it's not real intense. It's like I said, the pleasure that I get from him is more from knowing how much he enjoys having sex with me. He tends to tell me about it. He talks a lot. He grunts and wickers and blows in my ear, etc. And that is very erotic to me, more so than the physical sex.
When he's courting me, as it were, trying to entice me to bend down or kneel down, he does a lot of, I call it a hubba hubba. He just kind of goes and makes this little hubba hubba noise to me. And then once he's in, I mean, for every stroke that he does, he makes this big grunting noise. And then when he orgasms, he makes an even bigger grunting noise.
And he tends to like to hold on with his teeth. And I actually have some scars on my back from where he's bitten onto me, just hanging on. They do the same thing with mares when they have sex. And only mares have fur to hang on to. He tends to get a big chunk of skin with me. And that can be quite painful. But usually I don't even notice until after the fact because I'm so caught up in the moment. And then I get up to the house and Ellie says, "Oh, I see you've been down fooling around. You've got a big bite mark on your back again."
All right. So, those are the first people. And again, I'm sure I don't need to warn you about this, but don't try this at home. There was a case up in Oregon not too long ago, a couple of years ago, where there was a farm. And you could go to the farm and spend the weekend there, pay money to spend the weekend there, and have sex with the different animals on the farm. And these guys went up there, and the guy had sex with a full-grown horse and perforated his intestines. And because he was so embarrassed, he didn't go to the hospital and get help, and he died from it. And then the police came and they raided the farm, and they, we're going to shut this down. And they said, we're going to arrest people. And they said, wait a minute, there's no law against this. And so they couldn't do anything. And so then that spurred them to introduce some legislature to ban bestiality. And I'm not sure, there's still some states where bestiality is legal, but not many anymore. It's been banned in most places. I believe California, I don't believe it's legal here. And I think it's no longer legal in Oregon or Washington, wherever that was anymore. So again, this is something that you'll see. The big question here is, some people look at this and they say bestiality is akin to child abuse. Because just like children, animals are really not capable of consenting to sex. They don't have the mental wherewithal, emotional wherewithal to consent to sex. So this is something that's done non-consensually to the animals. The bestiality people, as you saw in the video, will say, well, the animals enjoy it, so it's obvious they enjoy it, so it's okay to do it. And other people will say, no, that's not, you don't know that that's the case. You're circumventing their natural mating patterns or whatever. This is a form of abuse, right? And so again, there's people arguing about this backwards and forwards. Most people tend to find bestiality somewhat disgusting. I assume most of you guys like that. You don't think this is something you want to go try. If you are going to go try this, please do not ever say that you got the idea from my class. Okay? But you should know this. If you're going to go on and become a therapist and you're sitting in your office one day and somebody comes into your office and they start telling you there was some bestiality going on, rather than you freaking out about it and going, oh, Gus, running out of the room, and that person no longer getting any help, hopefully now you've been socially inoculated to it, that you can go, at least have a conversation with the person, maybe try to help them. Okay, so it's one of the reasons why I'm showing you this stuff. Okay. Any questions about bestiality? Not super widespread as far as we know, but it does occur. You'll see things in the paper. There was a case in Vegas a few years ago where a woman is in her backyard sunbathing naked and ended up having sex with her dog, and the neighbors saw it. They called the cops on her, and et cetera, et cetera. So you'll see some of these kind of things show up in the paper every now and then. Sometimes related to alcohol and drug use. I think that case there may have been some alcohol and drugs. I can't remember. Great mythology, right? This is from Greek myth. You guys know the Greek myth about the swan. That Zeus was the god, the god of the head of the gods of Olympus. He liked to take on animal forms and different forms and come down and seduce human women. And this is one time where he comes down and he seduces as a swan Leto, and he takes the form as a swan and has sex with her. So this is one of the things where you see bestiality in the myths, right? Okay. Well, you know, I actually put a thing up here. So you can see here, the red is where zoophilia, bestiality is a felony. The orange is where it's a felony and a misdemeanor both. That's in Alaska. Yellow is where it's a misdemeanor, and white is where it's still legal. So if you want to have sex with an animal, the closest place you go is Nevada. Now that may have changed since then. I don't know. This might be a year or two old. So it may have changed. Nevada, Virginia. My mom lives out in the country, Virginia. Now things are starting to make a little more sense to me. Okay, so anyway, you can see Louisiana. So you know, the bon temps roulé, right? You know. Animals. There's a whole video about animal lovers. These guys now found each other on the internet. Let's see if this shows up.
Only speaks to people who've broken
I won't show the whole thing, but this is a whole video of people
My wife can be
in the animal lovers. So anyway, I put this video. I put it up on the link, so it's under the module for this week and under the links. If you want to watch the whole video of the animal lovers, you can watch the whole thing. Okay, so this is basically the same thing. Oh, and this is an update, maybe. Yeah, this is an update. Sorry, this is the update. So this is the update video. So yeah, so it's only still legal in 4 states and D.C., Washington, D.C. That also kind of makes sense, but I won't talk about that. Guam, it's legal. And I can't remember this. What's this? This is not Hawaii. This is... Anyway, this is where our islands out there. Puerto Rico, it's not legal. Hawaii, it's legal. So it's a few places it's still legal. Okay. All right. Again, lots of examples. You can find, again, if you want to watch this, these women are not necessarily into bestiality, but they're happy to do stuff to get paid for it. So you'll see bestiality videos on, the interwebs. And again, that's out. Like I show you pictures of that. More common than supposed. Now this is an interesting fetish or paraphilia called formicophilia. You might consider this a form of bestiality. Some people would, some people wouldn't. This is where you like to have things crawling on your body. Formica for insects, where you like to have things crawling on your body. And so it might be various types of insects, ants. It could be stinging things. It could be things that are, slimy like snails, and this is a kind of a paraphilia you'll find about. I wrote a little bit about this. There's a book where the guy talks about this stuff. Okay, I talked about the crush fetish already, and again, there's lots of variations of this. The one variation is a guy who likes to go to bars in New York City and roll himself up in the carpet and just have people like walk on him all night. That's the mild variation, and this goes all the way up to the version where people like to start smushing small animals and even larger animals, and then progresses to basically animal torture, where people are horrendously torturing animals and getting off to watching these videos. So when I do my testimony, I gave testimony with the U.S. Humane Society, and they had some people in there testifying about some of the more horrendous animal torture stuff, and it was really, really, really hard to hear about. It was really tough. I mean, there's just really sick things people do to other animals. But again, it all comes under this sort of crush fetish thing. And And there's a lot of stuff here, so if you want to go, you can see my thing, my video of me talking there. I don't know, let's see a little bit of this. If this is still up. It is up, what do you know? That's the thing about our government. It's there forever. All right, so anyway, here's me. I think my hair is long. I look really weird here. Kind of Mephistopheles sort of looking. Starts after 9 minutes. This is Senator John Kyle, super hyper-conservative guy from Arizona, who was presiding over the committee meeting that day. This was one of, I think, 6 bipartisan things that passed in the entire year. So this was actually a bipartisan thing. The only thing they could agree on, the only thing our senators could agree on is that we shouldn't be stepping on, crushing small animals. That was about it, right? But I met John Kyle, very nice guy, very friendly to me and very nice. I talked to him after the thing, and really appreciative of me coming in and talking. So, he's retired now. He's the guy who came and took over from McCain after McCain died. He stepped in as on a temporary basis. And then I guess he's not going to do that anymore. Anyway, you can see him talking. This is also
It was unconstitutionally overbroad. Assistant professor at California State University, Channel Islands.
Hey,
as we all know, the Humane Society has been a long-standing champion against animal cruelty and is intimately familiar with the problem of budgets.
Many people in our
That's
viewers can
Nancy. She
even
was the
the cruel nature
Humane
of these
Society
videos.
person.
Arousing
There's
fantasies,
me.
urges, or behaviors related to non-human objects, including animals, non-consenting persons, or children, and suffering and or humiliation of oneself or a
So
partner.
there you go. So basically, that's my 10-minute version of the lecture I gave you today. So I'm there on, that's my claim to fame. And then we had to submit written testimony, which had a reference to chimp and frog. So I'm done. Don't have to do anything else. Crush video. Here's some variations. Here's a really interesting one. Fits along with the child is being beaten thing. This one's not so bad. Giantest woman. Giant women. Okay. So imagine you're a guy and you. This is really what gets you off. Giant women. So he's going to stomp all over you, right? By the way, there's a great Frank Zappa song. Anybody know Frank Zappa? Carolina Hardcore Ecstasy. One of his best guitar solos ever. About this. So, what can I say? So, hopefully none of you are getting aroused by this. I better stop it just in case.
Everything else is deleted.
Yeah, everything else is deleted, yeah. You got to delete a lot of this stuff. There's an organization called Stop Crush. Again, I could talk for hours about this stuff. I'm not going to talk a whole bunch about it. I think I put my testimony, the written testimony, up for you guys to read online. If not, it's here. I can make it available. Let's see if this is one of the one. I think I have one of grapes, maybe. Let's see. The whole, here it is. Yeah. Again, I don't want to show you too much of this. Just in case you're going to start. Oh, yeah, there's animal ones too, by the way. That's a whole other thing. So, again, so you can check this stuff out. Don't watch the actual videos because they're really horrible. Don't buy any of them because it's now illegal. Okay, it's illegal to distribute these things. Certainly don't sell them. This is another weird thing. I just put this up because I just thought this one was weird, called splorching. This is where you get these things these phallic-like things that look like insect ovipositors. So a lot of insects have things that they extend, females extend out and then extrude eggs from them. You've seen this stuff? You've seen this stuff? Well, let's show you what this looks like. This is very weird. I just found this one to be really weird. Okay, yeah, we know about this.
You can probably scroll down.
I can't. It's not letting me scroll down. Oh, this is the website. That's why. Okay. Let me in. Okay, so here you can buy them. The Bork, the Glorp, various things. And again, these can appeal to males and females, depending on what you're into. And let's see if there's a little demonstration video of this here. Here's the Glorp. Okay, not to be too graphic about it, but you know. But that's not the good part. The part is the egg coming out. So it's like an insect, right? Okay. We want to see the egg come out now. That's the good part. Oh, they're going to do it again. Okay, sorry about that. Oh, here we go. There we go. There we go. I want you to get to the good part, the egg coming out, right? That's the part, okay? So, this is a great one because this is really confusing you about your sexuality right now, right? Is it male, is it a phallic, or is it female? Because in the insect kingdom, these ovipositors they're female things so they can extrude eggs out. So this is very confusing, and people are really into this thing. They call it splorching. So this is another weird fetish. Again, do not try this at home, or if you do try it, please do not tell anybody you got the idea from us. Okay? So that's splorching for you. Frottage. You know about frottage? This is another, this is a paraphilia. It's the French word for rubbing. Mostly involves men who touch women inappropriately in public places, usually like a train or a bus. Okay? And there's an example. Let's see. There's some videos of this too. It's unavailable, so we won't watch that today. But basically, in a crowded place, a man will usually rub up against a woman and derive some sexual satisfaction from this. It can be overt or covert, with the woman realizing what is happening or not. It can involve stroking a leg, grabbing buttocks, or even breasts. It can be more serious, and it often involves the guy being wasted of some kind. Okay? Now, men will have some idea that women in a crowded public place like this, they like guys going and rubbing up against them. That is, as far as I know, 100% of the women I've talked to, that is absolutely not true. Women do not like being rubbed up against. Now, you guys are all from California, so you don't have the experience really probably of being on public transportation in places where they have like trains. We don't have a lot of trains, and we do have trains. They're not very crowded. They're not very well used. We don't have a lot of them. But if you're in a place like, let's say, Japan, where they pack people into the trains like sardines. You have no personal space. You're just smushed up against another person. That's where you see this kind of stuff. Or India, very common. Trains are very crowded. So places where you have good public transportation systems with trains, this is where the problem, or even buses where people are crammed in together, this is the problem. I lived in Boston. We definitely have this kind of smushing together in the public transportation in Boston. I never saw frottage happening, but you could see where it could happen. Guy gets something after the Red Sox game, he's pissed off because they lost again, he's drunk, he rubs up against some woman, thinks, she likes this, I'm drunk, you know. Yeah, so we could piss out to sit and rub against that, you know, right? Bad. That kind of stuff happens. So what's happened in some places like in India and in Japan now, they have separate train cars for women only, because this has become a problem of sort of epidemic proportions, where you have lots of drunk people and you have them going in trains crowded together with women, drunk men, and the problem becomes so bad that they've got to do something. They have separate train cars for men and women now. And so if you don't want to risk this stuff, you just go in a separate train car and you don't have to worry about it. Yes?
So my mom grew up in New York, and so
Yeah.
she had to deal with these guys all the time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you usually just whack them in the head with their purse.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. New Yorkers are like, New Yorkers, you take your life in your hands, the woman may pull a knife and stab you.
Yeah.
Might be deserved. But no, this happens in America. It does happen in America. This doesn't happen much in California because we don't do much public transportation. Okay? Anyway, so this is very common. If you go to other countries, if you're a woman, be aware that this is very common. Some countries, it seems a little more rapey than other places. I don't know. I don't want to say anything bad about any other countries, but you got to make sure that you're careful, okay? Because you may not used to being in California, being in your own car, in your own safety bubble, driving around. You're not used to having to get in the train, and this kind of thing can happen. I was in Japan. We drove around. We went all around Japan on the trains with our students, and we never had a problem with this. But we only were going during the daytime. At night, after guys have been drinking and they get on the train, I think that's when the trouble starts. So, okay. I did have something here. What's this? Oh, this is a TV reporter getting groped in public here. So anyway, Japanese. So there you go. Anyway, okay. Here's an account from an actress from the 1930s named Zoya Fedorova, who talks about this happening to her in a streetcar in 1930 in Moscow. So this has been around basically as long as we've had public transportation and trains, we've had frottage. We've had this kind of groping behavior. So there you go. I mean, this is way back in the 1930, this happening in Moscow. So this is common around the world. Okay? And by the way, it's not just in trains. Guys, you should now know, because of the Me Too stuff going on, you do not grab and grope on women without their consent. And I'd say even if you're getting consent, make sure you get double consent. Ask again, make sure it's okay before you start doing, you get a little handsy with women. This is now, you know, I mean, this is a real problem. The thing about Joe Biden now, this is coming out, like, we don't know if this is like an innocent thing he's doing, or he's just sort of like, you know, very friendly in a nice way, or he's creepy. We don't really know yet, you know, but this is the kind of thing is now people are really sensitized to this. Okay? Other paraphilias and sexual behaviors. We only have a couple minutes, so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Sadomasochism. Oh, how am I going to go through this quickly? This is a paraphilia where basically people take either a sadistic role or a masochistic role. They like inflicting some pain on another person. That gets them some jollies, either sexual or otherwise, or they like receiving the pain, and that gives them jollies, either sexual or otherwise, or they might like to do a little bit of both. Sadomasochism is really quite common. A lot of human beings like their sex a little rough, a little hair pulling, a little spanking, a little fighting going along with whatever other sexual stuff they do. And then there's people who go to the next level where they actually like to create scenes, sadomasochistic scenes that might involve restraint, it might involve some sort of flagellation, whipping of some sort, and various other things. Okay? And so there's a whole community that's actually really quite popular. This comes from, first people to talk about this were Krafft Ebing and Sigmund Freud. They talked about S&M, and I showed you the Freud paper. And again, we already went through the theories of it, so I'm not going to go into that. Havelock Ellis, another guy, who wrote about this very early on. And the idea here is that people can experience pleasure from inflicting the pain, but people also experience pleasure from receiving the pain. And one of the ideas, if you're more behaviorally oriented, is this is maybe you learned in early childhood that you experienced love along with the pain, right? So maybe your parents loved you, but they also beat you, right? And you learn to experience love from being beaten, or from, you know, later on being the one who does the beating, right? So identifying with the one who does the beating. And so this is the idea here, if you want to just think of it sort of behaviorally. Now, there's a lot written about this, because again, it's very common, it's very popular. Again, as you know, the movie 50 Shades of Grey was super popular. So again, probably most psychologists agree that some experiences during early development probably have some relationship to this. Okay. You know, and again, you know, you can find various experiences. I'm a Freudian, so I'm going to tell you that probably, you know, the genesis of this stuff is all in very early childhood. The person may not realize it till they're a teenager, but probably the genesis of this happened in early childhood. I mean, this is true for most fetishes, by the way. I would say all fetishes, from my point of view. Okay, but also you can learn this stuff through conditioning. You're not into sadomasochism, but let's say, you know, your boyfriend is into it, or you're into it and your boyfriend isn't into it, and then what you do is, you know, he wants to be with you, so he learns to like this, so he can do this with you. I had a student here, she was one of my former TAs, and she was an avid practitioner of BDSM, and she told me the story about her boyfriend was not into this stuff at all, but he wanted to be with her, so he got into it because of her. He's not really that into it. She stopped doing it after a while. He also stopped. He was just doing it to be with her. Okay. So you can also learn to do this through conditioning. Okay. And it looks like the research is showing that maybe more females may learn it through conditioning and association with somebody doing it than more males. That's at least what a little bit of research is showing on this. A lot more research could be done, by the way. So there's a book called S&M 101, A Realistic Introduction by this guy, Jay Wiseman, and he talks all about this. defining S&M as the knowing use of psychological dominance, submission, and physical bondage in a consensual, legal, and safe manner. And so this is what you have for these guys, these S&M guys, that S&M, at least for the middle level of practitioners, not the extreme edge people, the real extreme people, and not the people who just have a little rough sex, but the people sort of in the middle, that this is a consensual activity, okay? And you have to consent to everything. And in fact, you have to consent to everything so much so that they do is they make you sign a contract. Also, things are done with safety. There's always a safe word, okay? And there's a slow down word, and there's a stop word. Okay, so this is always the case for these guys. They don't do this when somebody's emotionally upset or stoned, supposedly, or if somebody's actually going to get some permanent damage done to them. You have to leave, stop it. Okay? And everything is negotiated beforehand. And this is how it's different than abuse. S&M plays consensual, abuse is not. S&M players plan their activities, abusers do not. S&M play is negotiated, abuse is not. S&M play can enhance the relationship between players, abuse cannot, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Here's an example of a contract. You contract everything. Whether or not this is what kind of S&M scene is going to be, what's going to be done, is there going to be sex involved? If so, what type of sex, or there's not going to be sex involved. By the way, it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be sex happening. It could just be a beating or something else, but not necessarily sex. So they go through everything, they do this stuff, they sign it, everybody understands, here's what the safe word is, everything is spelled out here. Okay, so this is a sub-community, the BDSM sub-community. This is the stuff that they typically agree to. Now again, there's always people who are off on the edge, the sort of extreme edge, who may not be doing this, but most BDSM people, this is the typical way they do it. Here's a negotiation form, who will take part, who will be dominant, who will be submissive, when will the session occur, how long will it last, what's going to go on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all these things down here. Okay? Here's your BDSM apparatus. I think you guys have seen all these kind of things. My TA, when she came and did this lecture, she brought in a variety of things here, and we had one student in the back going, "Oh, that's disgusting. You're the most disgusting person I've ever seen." We had one girl sitting in the front going like this, going, "Yeah, that's really cool. How do I get into this, right?" So, I was just waiting that day for the president to make a surprise visit in the class, showing some donors in the classroom, I was just worried they were going to come in and see this stuff, this BDSM stuff. She wore a corset, and it was great. I wish I had taped it. Unfortunately, I did not. Okay. But all the things, paddles, restraints, all this kind of thing, nipple clamps here, hot wax, all these kind of things fit into the BDSM scene. Okay. More stuff here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. If you go to San Francisco, you can see the leather days, and this is an interesting one because here she's combined not only BDSM, but she's also combined something called pony play, where she's also dressed up in the BDSM thing and she's got some restraints on her, but she's also acting like a pony. There's a whole other paraphilia called pony play and puppy play, where somebody pretends to be an animal. I did a TV show on this one too. This is in San Francisco at the Leather Festival you can go to if you want. Let's see, there's also a lot of restraint kind of things. I used to go to the Renaissance Fair. You guys know what the Renaissance Fair? Where people dress up and present out in Renaissance time. I used to bring my kid to it. And then my BDSM TA told me one day, she goes, "Oh, you know what happens after the doors close?" He goes, "We're doing this kind of stuff. We're all dressed up in leather, and we do restraints and whipping and flashlights." It turns into a BDSM scene. And I thought, yeah, okay, I'm done. No judgment, no judgment, just not my thing. No judgment, they're having fun, that's awesome, but, not my thing, but I'm very happy for them. Okay, good. So this would be the Renaissance Fair. This might actually be the Renaissance Fair here afterward. Also, dressing up in latex, these kind of things, also very typical, leather, tight corsets, all these kind of things going on. I'm going to show you the extreme body modification stuff later on. A really interesting study, I'll mention this just in the last few minutes, where they looked at toxoplasmosis infection and sexual attraction to fear, danger, pain, and submissiveness. And the theory is Toxoplasmosis gondii is a parasite. It's usually found in cats, and it's been associated with human beings can be carriers of this. You don't have any overt symptoms, but there's been some possibility, thought, I think I mentioned this to you, that it might have something to do with people becoming schizophrenic. and it make changes in the nervous system. It does this with mice. Mice get infected with this through cat feces, and then the mice become unafraid of the cats. They'll just walk up to a cat and just go like this, and the cat will go and eat the mouse, and then get the more toxoplasmosis parasite in it, and then again, that's how its life cycle. And then it'll poo it out again, and then that's how the life cycle keeps going. And so there's the idea that toxoplasmosis can make changes in the brains of human beings. There's been a lot of research about this in schizophrenia, and there's some, it hasn't been disproven. So there's some idea that may have relate to schizophrenia, but the idea is it may also make behavior in humans that's similar to what happens in rodents, that makes humans less, have some sort of sexual attraction to fear, danger, and pain, and submissiveness. And one of the thoughts is that toxoplasmosis infected subjects, people, may have more sexual fantasies related to sort of BDSM sorts of things, and may practice more BDSM kinds of things than toxoplasma-free subjects. And so they did a study in here, and indeed this is what they found. And so there may be something, and supposedly they had 36,000 people they drew this from, and they had 5,000 that were toxoplasmosis free and 741 were toxoplasmosis infected. And they showed that the infected and non-infected differed in their sexual behaviors this way. So this is very interesting. So again, somebody wants to do a great doctoral dissertation, you go down to the BDSM clubs down in LA, you get in, you start doing some, and you can look for the vampires too, and everybody else is doing some kind of risky sexual behavior, and you go down and see if their infection status on toxoplasmosis is different than a general population. Quite fascinating study. I would be more than happy to be on that dissertation committee. It'd be very interesting. So this is a really quite interesting thing. That's not to say everybody who does BDSM is infected with toxoplasmosis, but it's an interesting hypothesis there that there may be a relationship, at least for some people. Okay? Bunch of other ones really quick. I'm not going to have time to get through all these. Autoerotic asphyxiation. Please do not try this one at home. This is where somebody puts something around their neck and restricts their airflow and blood supply to the brain while they are masturbating, and usually right at the point of masturbation. This will supposedly increase the the intensity of the orgasm. Okay? The problem is people do this alone, they slip, they pass out at the last moment, and then they die from this. And this is something that's interesting because we know that this is something that actually functions in a sort of infectious way, mostly among young males. Teenagers, one finds out about this, and then a bunch of other ones are doing this, and then eventually somebody dies. And so this is something that seems to pass in a sort of infectious, socially infectious way. So again, don't go if you have like teenage, cousins or brothers or sisters, or whatever. Don't go tell them about this, because this is one that maybe they shouldn't really be learning about. Okay, this one can be. One kid will try it, another kid will then try it, and this is what happens. They see a whole like clusters of this stuff. And then they find this out because some kid slipped and then died from it. Okay? The most famous case of this, of course, was David Carradine, who unfortunately was one of my childhood heroes. He starred in that TV series Kung Fu, which was in the 70s. I love that series. It was great. He was the cool Kung Fu master who wandered around the Old West and fought people. And he was found in a room in Thailand, and he had hung himself. Supposedly, this is a picture from that. And he had somebody with him probably, but the guy took off when things went wrong, and so then this is the autopsy picture of him here, and unfortunately he succumbed to that. So it's not just kids who do this, okay, but be very careful about this. So don't do this one at home, and don't tell anybody who might be susceptible to doing this. Okay, very dangerous. Okay, erotomania, Clerambault syndrome, you guys know this as stalking. I can talk about this a little more next time. That is commonly found in Los Angeles. If you're a movie star, you haven't really made it until you have a stalker. That's the joke, but this is really not a joking matter. Stalking can be very serious. Sometimes people get killed by stalking. Sometimes stalking is the prelude to things like shooting people up. Even school shooters sometimes start as stalkers, such as the guy Cho who shot up Virginia Tech University. He was stalking a woman beforehand. So this can be very serious. I mentioned to you mate guarding before, as far as evolutionary psychology and sex, and this can be seen as a sort of maybe a delusional form of mate guarding. A lot of times the stalker will have a delusion that the person being stalked is in love with them or is, married to them or whatever. And so again, it's not a good combination, mate guarding and some sort of delusion. There have been some very famous cases. You may have heard of this one, Jodie Foster. This guy, John Hinckley, was obsessed with Jodie Foster. And to prove his love to her, he shot Ronald Reagan. And he's been sent to prison. There's a big debate now. They want to let him out. So there's some debate about that. I don't know, somebody should check on to see if he got out or not. He was doing, I know they gave him furloughs on the weekend and things, and he was partly getting out. I don't know if they let him out completely or not yet. Another very famous case was the singer Bjork, who had a very severe delusional stalker who decided that if she wasn't going to go off with him, that he would kill her and then kill himself, and then they would be together forever. So he constructed an elaborate mail bomb and sent that to her. And luckily for her, that was intercepted at the post office. And they went and found the guy, and he had killed himself, and he left a very elaborate video record, very frightening video record of himself, which I will play a little moment of for you. You can see how scary and delusional people who can be stalkers can get.
Hello. My name
This is the stalker.
is Ricardo Lopez. It is January 14th, 1996. Today's my birthday. I'm 21.
Hollywood, Florida. A young fan, Ricardo Lopez, begins a video diary, a chronicle of his obsession with rock singer Bjork. These haunting videos, recorded over a year, provide a rare and frightening glimpse into the private fantasies of the stalker.
With celebrity stalkers, oftentimes they are more psychotic than other stalkers. They've had a break with reality. They create their own internal, idiosyncratic, private, bizarre reality.
I'm going to show you who I am.
In the end, there is no other way to understand the stalker than to see the world through his eyes. Lonely, cut off, stalkers become obsessed with their victims. When they target celebrities, when there is no real relationship, the intensity of their madness becomes clear. The day after his birthday, he continues the diary.
I want to be the biggest influence in her life, the most important person who changed her life more than anybody else, okay? The guy who took her life, okay? I am the angel of death for her.
He's very hostile toward her. There's a hatred for her. There's a desire to torture her. By killing her, ironically, he can recreate in his mind an idealized image of her and then be with her.
His obsession spiraled downward for more than 9 months until he devises a final plan. He designs and constructs an acid-spraying mail bomb.
Okay, pay attention. Let's hit him with a direct hit. With you.
The bomb armed, just wrapped and mailed, Lopez begins a bizarre ritual. Sadly, he has now lost all touch with reality. We warn you, what you are about to witness is a frightening and direct view of madness.
Okay, it's time.
Believing the object of his obsession would soon die from his bomb, he can only dream of the ultimate, to be united with her in death. Moments later, Lopez committed suicide. leaving 18 hours of videotape that enabled police to intercept the deadly package before it could harm anyone. Alone in his fantasy, Lopez never realized he was on a course to an inevitable and tragic conclusion.
All right, so you get an idea there. So, you know, we take stalking very seriously. I think I mentioned you guys, I've had a couple cases in my classes here. And, you know, I typically will immediately go to the police and get them involved. And that is usually enough to resolve the cases. We've had people expelled because of this kind of behavior. We've had people brought up on disciplinary charges, things like that. So if this is something that's happening to you, if there's a stalker, you know, something going on here, you know, please let the police know. Go talk to the police right away. Don't let it get out of hand. Yes?
I had something like that when I was like, you know, like 12, and it was another female. Is that really rare?
Not so much. I mean, maybe for kids it's more rare, but it's males and females, you know. You see them both doing this. I try to remember, I think females may be more, I think there may be more females, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay, yeah, because it seems to fit.
Yeah.
He was freed in 2016.
I thought he killed himself.
No, this guy.
Oh, this guy. Oh, he was freed.
Yeah,
Okay,
he was freed in
Hinckley was freed. Yeah,
2016
they
from the
finally let him
mental
out.
hospital.
They finally let him out. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hinckley finally got out. Yeah. Here's the letter to Jodie Foster. Again, you see the delusion there. Let's talk a little bit about necrophilia. Necrophilia is where somebody has a paraphilia where they would like to have sex with a dead person. Okay? And so this, again, also not very common. And as you might expect, the people who get into necrophilia usually are people who have access to dead bodies. So mortuary workers, people like this, are the ones who typically get involved in this. And one thing you could think is, remember I told you that, you know, remember back to your quiz, you know, the question about male sexuality, the men will basically hump anything. Well, in many cases of necrophilia, this is exactly what's going on. It's a crime. In many places, this is a crime. It's a crime of opportunity. Okay, and you know, you're working in the mortuary, you know, they brought in a body of a female, she's kind of cute, she's still warm, nobody's around, and you know, and you go for it, right? So a lot of the cases are like that. Okay, a lot of the cases are like that. There are cases where people have become obsessed and infatuated with somebody who's died, or they become infatuated with somebody, the person dies and they want to still be with them. I'll tell you about a famous case of that in a second. There's a very, let's see if this video will play here. Let's see if I have I'll give you a case that was more recent.
We're following a developing story alert as a former Hamilton County morgue employee is accused of having sex with a corpse.
It's a new chapter in a mystery dating back to August of 1982. That's when door-to-door salesman David Steffen killed 19-year-old Karen Range at a Roselawn home. He was sent to Ohio's death row. Steffen confessed to the murder but denied raping Range. That's where former morgue worker Kenneth Douglas comes into the picture. Douglas was in charge of checking Range's body into the morgue and now stands accused of sexually abusing her corpse. It wasn't until now 55-year-old Douglas was arrested on an unrelated drug charge in March that a DNA sample was taken and linked him to the semen in Range's body. He is now charged with gross abuse of a corpse.
Having sex with a corpse is clinically called necrophilia. It's considered a mental disorder that can be treated but never cured. Local 12's Lauren Berkrich is live at the coroner's office in Corryville with a closer look at this disorder. Lauren.
Kid, this is an act that is viewed as repulsive and offensive. The idea of having sex with a corpse is almost impossible to understand, but it is a mental disorder. Necrophiliacs often first develop the desire as preteens, and it can turn into an obsession. So tonight, with the help of experts, we're going to take a closer look at this disorder and what may have happened to Karen Range. More than 25 years after Karen Range was murdered, we learn Kenneth Douglas, a coroner's employee who placed Range's body in refrigeration, may be responsible for having sex with her corpse. That act is known as necrophilia.
What they will do is they will engage, put themselves in position to engage in sexual acts with people who can't resist. And this is one form of that.
a dead person certainly can't resist.
Forensic psychiatrist Scott Bressler describes necrophilia as a severe sexual fetish, but it's not just about sex. It leads to an imagined relationship.
And they can go into their mind and fantasize whatever they want to fantasize in a very bizarre, obviously, way.
It's all in their mind. To a great extent, it's the same thing with pornography. The person in their mind is creating an imaginary fantasy relationship.
Psychology.
And by the way, he got this wrong. He's technically incorrect, the first guy. It's not a fetish. It's a paraphilia. Okay? So even the experts confuse paraphilia and fetish, right? Just to point that out.
Dr. Stuart Bassman has treated necrophiliacs and says in their mind it's a loving act. Hard to understand, yes, but that could mean Karen Range's rapist did not intend to hurt her.
In their mind, they believe they're doing something very innocent. Most of the time, they believe they're doing something that's not really hurting someone.
Kenneth Douglas worked at the coroner's office for 16 years. It could have been the opportunity he needed to act on his desire, and it could have been an obsession. Dr. Bassman says necrophiliacs often have more than one victim.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure I'm buying all that. I think it's just a crime of opportunity. But anyway, this is the typical kind of thing you see with these cases of necrophilia. You work in a morgue, so you become very habituated and used to seeing dead bodies around, so they don't have the ick factor anymore. Now, a little interlude from the animal kingdom, because I do, I'm a frustrated biologist, and I like to talk about animal stuff. So there's actually a small frog, the Rhinella proboscidea, that is known to commit necrophilia. And this is a frog that will mate with a female frog to the point where she will be pushed into the water, and at the point where she can no longer breathe, and she will die. And he will continue mating with her, and then she will then, and apparently this is a mating strategy that has survival value, because this long, intense sort of mating produces more offspring. And so if in a few cases the female dies during this process, the overall fitness of the act, that it produces more offspring, on average, keeps this behavior occurring. And so you'll see with these frogs, you'll see them mating with, the male frogs mating sometimes with the female to the point where she has died, and even after death continuing to mate with them. So again, if you want to be an evolutionary person about this, you can, at least for the frogs, it makes sense. I don't think this necessarily makes sense for human beings, but for frogs, this makes sense. Now, necrophilia and psychoanalysis. The psychoanalyst Erich Fromm looked at necrophilia as a character orientation, not necessarily sexual. It's an attraction to dead or to something that can be totally controlled. It's related to a hatred of life and destructiveness. And the necrophilia is the opposite of the love of life and living things. For instance, Fromm thought a lot of the Nazis had sort of a necrophilia complex. They sort of had a love of death. It's not quite the same as Freud's idea of thanatos, which is a biologically determined drive. Necrophilia is learned in early childhood and stems from a lack of love. According to Fromm, this results in attraction to the mechanistic, which can be completely controlled, and includes the love of weapons, worship of technology, the glorification of bureaucracy. So when you see people sort of in love with, like guns, and you see them in love with, weapon systems and the military-industrial complex, then for Fromm, this would be an indication of sort of a necrophilia-like character. And Fromm wrote a couple books, The Heart of Man, and he also wrote one called The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, where he elaborates on these ideas. Now, very interesting, in the past, 10, 20 years, 10, 15 years, we seem to, in our society, have developed a love of zombies. Zombies have become very popular, and we have shows like The Walking Dead, and we have this movie, which is a very good movie, by the way, called Warm Bodies, which is almost a reverse zombie movie. The zombies actually revert back to being humans at the end. I don't want to give the punchline away, but it's a very, very uplifting movie in a weird way. And so I asked this, and I really like zombies. I'm really interested in zombies. So I asked this question: is love of zombies equal to necrophilias. There are little necrophilic stuff in zombies. And I think the answer to that is maybe. Okay, maybe. Maybe this love of zombies, represents, sort of a desire to just be a blind, machine that just sort of goes and just gratifies its urges, without consequence. And that people live in a more mechanistic, controlled society. They long for this just sort of letting go, right? And if you're dead, you can just let go. You don't have to be controlled by anything. You can just walk around and just fulfill your desires. And so in a way, zombieism is a kind of it's not a love of dead bodies like in a sexual way where you can control the dead body, but it's a way that you can become dead and then not have to be under all the constraints of society. Okay, so I think there may be something to that. I don't know. I'm still thinking about this, but it's an idea. And again, zombies very popular, right? Now, zombie movies, by the way, are generally not about the zombies. They're generally about how humans react to the zombies, and so they a lot of times have a social message, which I think is very interesting. And I don't know if zombies is, the love of zombies, I don't know if this is tapering off now. How many of you guys still watch The Walking Dead? Well, a few of you. You're hanging in there. It might be a show that maybe should have ended. No? See, that's who I like, a true fan. There you go. So, again, The Walking Dead is also really a show about social commentary. It's not less about the zombies and more about, how the people deal with the zombies, okay, which is very typical. Now, I'll end this telling you the strange love story of a guy named Dr. Karl Tanzler. This is a really interesting story of necrophilia. Tanzler was a German immigrant who came to this country, settled in Florida, and one day he began treating this young woman for tuberculosis, which at that time was inevitably a fatal disease. He sort of falls in love with this woman when he's treating his patient, and he sends her flowers, and he hangs out with the family and does all these things. She inevitably dies, and he's very distraught. He gives the family money, for a fancy burial, all these kind of things, and the family interns her into a mausoleum. They go back a couple weeks later, and they find that her body is missing. And it turns out that her body was missing because Dr. Tanzler took the body, came and stole it, took it back to his house, basically embalmed it, stuffed it, put fake eyes on it, and kept the body there as his lover. And of course the family found out about this and they freaked out and they went to try to get him arrested, but there really weren't any laws against this at the time. But they reinterred the body, and there was some question about whether he was trying again to go and steal her again. He was very obsessed with her. Okay, so it's a very thing. You can go online and read the whole story. It's really quite interesting. But this is a case of kind of where it starts out as loving a human being, and then without having death get in the way of that. So she dies, and he continues to be obsessed with her. Yes.
So that whole love arc reminds me of the poem by Edgar Allan Poe, Annabelle Lee.
Yeah.
Have you heard of it?
Yes. Yes.
It's like a very beautiful romantic poem, and it says, and then she was like taken by death, but I still go lie with my Annabelle Lee, implying that he goes to her grave and lies with her.
Yeah. So this is sort of a concrete instance of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So so this kind of stuff does happen. So this is a real, unlike the guy who works in the morgue, this is more about being truly obsessed with somebody. And then the death just sort of is like an inconvenient thing. Let's get rid of. I'll still be in love with her. Still have physical love making with her. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk to you about. God, I've used up the whole time. I'm going to be a whole period behind on everything. All right, but this is kind of interesting too. We've talked about paraphilias and fetishes, and this is something that maybe I don't know, maybe tangentially related, but this is something called genetic sexual attraction, and I talked about that in the Westermarck effect. And this genetic sexual attraction sort of came to the attention of people who found out about the story of a brother and sister, Patrick and Susan Stubing. They were German, and they grew up apart. They were adopted out to different families, but met as adults and fell in love and had 4 children. Okay? And this is a pretty extreme case, but it's not unusual for blood relatives to feel an overwhelming attraction after being separated most of their lives. In other words, somebody who, a mother gives a son up for adoption, or a father, doesn't grow up with a daughter, but then meets her later in life. And then a lot of times in these cases, people will feel a very, very overwhelming attraction for their lost relative. Brothers and sisters, fathers and daughters, mothers and sons. And this has now started to become, people start to recognize this. There's a woman named Barbara Pogno who wrote a book about this. Here's another one, I'm pregnant with my baby's dad, or my dad's baby. This is another woman who, I think this is from Australia, this is another woman who never met her father until she was an adult, and then when they met this immediate attraction. And there's a woman named Barbara Pogno who wrote a book about this, and she was somebody who actually she had given up a son for adoption at a very, very young age and hadn't seen her son until he found her as a grown man, and she met him for the first time, and she said she felt this overwhelming attraction for him. And then in her case, she was able to actually sort of fight it off and deal with it. But she talked about this, and she said this was something, and this may stem from the fact that, when you're, like, for instance, a mother, you have this, incredible bond with your child, but then that bond is taken away, and then, when you see the person as adult, the bond reactivates, but now as adults, that sort of bond becomes sexualized, and these relationships can become sexual. So this is something that, it's not that common, but there are cases of this, documented cases of this. Now, this becomes interesting when you start thinking about modern technology and the ability for people to have in vitro fertilization. For instance, you're a woman, you want to have a baby, you go to you get a sperm donor, from that some man has left as a deposit in the sperm bank, and you have a baby, and this baby then grows up, but then somehow meets their father. Okay. Maybe you have a girl, she grows up, meets their father, or you have a boy, he grows up, meets their mother, or it wouldn't be the mother, meet the father. And so what happens in this case? That then these people, would they have this genetic attraction or not? Would they end up possibly, sleeping with their relative? Would there be any way for them to know? Because a lot of times, don't know where the sperm comes from in the sperm bank. You don't have records, it's kept anonymous. And so this is potentially something that could become an issue in the future, especially with a lot of people doing in vitro fertilization and things like that. So it's a very interesting thing. And again, there's a book by this woman, Barbara Pogno, and you'll see these kinds of things show up every once in a while in the paper. Now, the opposite of this is something called the Westermarck effect, and some people think this explains to some degree genetic sexual attraction, the phenomenon. The Westermarck effect is something they noticed that when kids are brought up together, especially from a young age, they will typically not form romantic relationships. And this is partly thought to be, something that may be biological, it may be an incest taboo, because we know if you have sex with somebody who's closely related to you, you're more likely to have genetic illnesses. The fitness of the offspring is greatly reduced, and so there is some evolutionary pressure not to be basically reproducing with people who are close to you. Now, Freud talked about the incest taboo, and the Westermarck effect seems to be a biological sort of manifestation of that, of an incest taboo. And what they found is when they've done studies on this, and the first studies of these were done on Israeli kibbutzes, where you have kids growing up on the commune and they grow up together, and they found that there were very few adult relationships with kids who grew up together. And this is the same thing, if you grow up with your brother or your sister, you're probably not going to have some sort of romantic relationship when you grow up. However, if you don't grow up with them, you don't see them while you're growing up, then you get phenomena like this GSA, this genetic sexual attraction thing. And so the idea here is there's something about growing up in close proximity with somebody at a young age in a certain developmental window, which would cause you to not want to grow up and have a romantic and sexual relationship with that person. Okay? And so this is what you're seeing. So they've done a bunch of studies on this, and the studies have kind of shown two things now. They've done more detailed studies, but they've kind of done two things. It seems to be the women who are choosing not to have these sexual relationships. Again, this goes along with this thing, which should be another theme of this class, that guys will hump anything, including your sisters. But it seems the women are the ones who are de-initializing or de-initiating these relationships with people they grew up with. And the other thing is, it seems that it may be related to a sense of smell. There may be some, sort of subconscious, sub rosa smell that goes on that you're familiar with, that if you're with that person at a young age, you are sensitized to the smell of that person as not being a romantic partner. And they've done studies of this, and it varies to a certain age. At a certain age, something like after, if you meet somebody, you grow up with somebody after, like, I can't remember, it's like 10 or 11 years old, then that person, they're perfectly fine to have a romantic sexual relationship with. But if you grow up with them when you're younger than that, then it seems to predispose women to not have a sexual relationship with that person. And so this is called the Westermark effect, because Westermark was the first guy who studied this. Okay? And so it seems to be, some sort of, this research seems to show, and there is some kind of incest happening here. Yes.
In my family unit, I grew up with my mom, my brother, my stepdad, and me and my mom both thought my brother's room smelled really bad, so bad that we wouldn't go in it. But my stepdad didn't notice the smell, so maybe that's related.
That could be a male-female thing too, though.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, generally the smell that they've studied, it's not something overt like that.
Oh, okay.
It's something more, maybe they're smelling pheromones, I don't know what it is, but it's less overt than that. Yes?
I thought you said that people weren't really affected by pheromones, animals just were.
That's the research showing. But in this case, there's at least some of the research I looked at, there's some kind of smell involved here. That the smell of the person's familiar, it's been familiar with you even when you were a very small child. And so when you grow up, that person does not, if you're a woman, that person does not seem to you to be a romantic target. Okay? But again, if you meet them when you're like 12 or 11, then that's okay. So there's been some studies done on this. And again, this is another area where more research could probably be done. It's really quite interesting.